for next Monday's special town meeting. We're going to take things a little bit out of order this evening, and we're going to begin with Article 7, Keeping of Animals, on page 4 of your warrant books. Mr. Town Manager, whenever you're ready.
I think I just turned the microphone off.
Take this. Let's take a talk tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. We have some staff here tonight who can assist with Article 7, which has to do with the keeping of animals in residential districts in town. I believe most everybody is familiar with some of the background and context with respect to this article. This was actually lined up to be considered this past spring when we were anticipating having our annual town meeting in May. This has been delayed due to the pandemic. There is actually an appeal right now to the decision that was ultimately made with respect to several goats that were being kept in an R1 zone. The code enforcement department ruled that out of compliance with the zoning bylaw. A court agreed with that interpretation. That decision was appealed, and that appeal process was paused through mutual agreement while this particular article made its way toward town meeting. I'd like to start by clarifying something. There are really two pieces to what's in the warrant tonight, one of which the Finance Committee and ultimately next week the town meeting will weigh in on, and the second of which was prepared by the Board of Health. So as an appendix in the back of the warrant is a fairly lengthy regulation that was put together by the Board of Health. It was adopted in February by the Board of Health. It was revisited in October by the Board of Health because of the amount of time that had passed. Those regulations, although adopted, don't become effective until they're published, and the Board of Health's intent is to wait until the town meeting has a chance next week to take a look at the zoning aspect before those regulations are ultimately published. And those are separate and distinct from the zoning changes that are being offered up here. Even if town meeting chooses not to expand the zoning with respect to the keeping of animals, those regulations will be in place. And I think that the simplest way to think about that, the zoning and town meeting ultimately determine where things can happen, and the Board of Health will be determining how things can happen in the places that town meeting determines it appropriate. So as you may know, currently the keeping of animals is permitted only in residential 2 zoning districts, which historically are the middle-sized district. It is prohibited in residential District 1 and residential District 3. So I'm not really calling it a proposal because staff is not necessarily recommending, but the reason that it's expansive right now to permit the keeping of animals in all 3 zones is that town meeting can only narrow, but they cannot expand the scope of a zoning article. So the proposal here is to allow residential zoning, allowing animals in residential zones 1, 2, and 3, subject to a permit issued by the Board of Health as described in the regulation. And the regulation looks at best practice with respect to feeding, housing, manure management, and all of the associated nuisances that go along with the keeping of animals. So I have Aaron Henry, our Director of Land Use and Community Services, is here. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Aaron. If not, then we'd be happy to answer questions that the Finance Committee may have about what's in the warrant.
Good. Ted?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay. The question I have, in the description here, in section 3, the reduced side and rear setback requirements for accessory structures apply only for structures less than 120 square feet. Is that for all structures less than 120?
Can you just speak up a little bit more?
Yeah. Is that for all structures less than 120 square feet, or does that pertain explicitly to structures for animal husbandry, or for that address this article?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have Aaron Henry take that question.
Through you. That is the first part of that note exists today, and it applies only to accessory structures less than 120 square feet. And I apologize, the way the tracking reads, I do see why that's confusing. But basically, the new part is the for all other structures, and we're making it clear that any structure associated with the keeping of animals, even if it's less than 120 square feet, is subject to the principal setbacks in the zoning district.
Okay. I think that's all for me.
Thank you. Sally?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It was a little hard, Steve, for me to understand what you were saying, all this mask stuff. But with this change, are we saying that the keeping of animals will be allowed in all 3 residential districts, subject to the Board of Health permit?
Subject to the Board of Health and subject to being able to meet the minimum setbacks required for the accessory structures. So the example of the selectmen's meeting is that Aaron Henry actually lives around the corner from this building. He's in an R1 district. His parcel is too small to meet any of the setback requirements, so he would not be permitted to keep an animal on his property. But we have some residential 1 parcels in town that are more than 100,000 square feet, just based on the odd nature of zoning in Danvers and how different districts were developed at different times.
Thank you.
Mike?
It looks like you've got everything pretty well clearly defined and pretty well regulated and so forth. I think I was around when the original complaint came out as to why they shouldn't have them in these other 2 districts. I guess we have to rely on the Board of Health in the future to enforce any problems that may occur with neighbors. So I guess I would go along with all 3 districts as long as the Board of Health will answer complaints from neighbors if there's any bad smells or deterioration of fences or any other thing that would impinge on somebody's property or their health or way of living. So I guess I will go along with all 3 districts for now. Thank you.
Sally Kearns?
Thank you. I'm very glad that something has been worked out. The manager referenced the odd nature of our zoning in Danvers, and I have felt for some time that it was just unfortunate that a homeowner who wanted to have goats but was in a district where they weren't allowed, that it turned into a lengthy process. So I'm happy that it's been worked out. The only concern I would have is whether the Board of Health feels like they're equipped and can handle all of the extra work, though I don't expect a torrent of applications for people to have goats, but you never know. And if they're okay with it and feel like they can manage all of the processing and the permitting applications, then it seems like it's a good idea, a good compromise or fix to the zoning glitch.
Thank you, Sally. Paul?
Well, I don't know whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 months ago I was confused, and I'm not in a better position at this particular point. I believe quite seriously that I fall in residential zone 2 where I live, and it's a 1/4 acre lot to the best of my knowledge. And I hear about the goats, and I understand the Board of Health now, if we do change these districts, then we're going to say that the whole town, with the exception of some areas, I don't know how it would affect, the industrial 2 and whatever, commercial 3. I just don't know where you draw the line. That's my problem. Whether it's goats, beyond that, is it chickens, or chickens are already? We keep talking about farm animals, the term animal husbandry, potbelly pigs, and swine, and sheep, and I don't know what the answer is, but quite frankly, the Board of Health can do their job fine. However, what happens if there are legal challenges to what the Board of Health decides? Are we opening up a can of worms because of one set of folks who are, I know they're great folks, but it's just, where does it stop? Where do you draw the line? Where do you expand it? And that's been my concern forever, and I still can't resolve it myself, so I'm not in favor of it. I will not support it at this point.
Mike Landers?
I'm all set.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the audience? Mr. Duggan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. I rise in opposition to this article. And the way we got here was because of the restriction where only the allowed use of keeping livestock was in R2. And that's what I want to focus on is livestock, not pets in general. We're talking about farm animals. But before I get into that, can someone explain again why the Board of Health is kind of separated out of this article? I see them specifically mentioned here. Why is there a distinction that we have this warrant article and then we have the Board of Health as a separate policing entity?
Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you. So, as we know, currently, animal husbandry is permitted in R2 zones, and there are no regulations with respect to the keeping of animals. So we don't have an exact number. I asked generally a couple of weeks ago, and maybe a couple of dozen, maybe slightly more than that, but certainly less than 50 homes in Danvers. Permits are required. We believe most of those folks who do have animals have permits with us. So this isn't, we have close to 3,000 R2 parcels and a couple, maybe 3 dozen properties that are currently keeping animals. So currently, there are no regulations governing the keeping of those animals. Even if the zoning fails at town meeting, the Board of Health staff feels like having this regulation in place, which is not part of the zoning book, but would be a standalone regulation of the Board of Health, is a good idea. So if nothing changes, we would still publish this regulation and it would apply to the keeping of animals in R2 districts. But if the town meeting chooses to expand the districts within which animals can be kept, they also feel like this regulation should be applied across the board so that neighbors can be sure that there are proper manure management plans, feed plans, that the structures are inspected and the like. So they're completely, it's here as a reference document, but it is not part of the zoning bylaw. It's just here for town meeting to reference.
All right, so we know that the existing bylaw was open to interpretation, and we heard the plaintiff's attorney, McCann, we heard the town council, Mr. DeLuca, and we heard the Massachusetts Land Court all agree that the existing bylaw is open to interpretation. And I don't see where this new bylaw resolves that. I see it as being more vague, open to interpretation, especially with the Board of Health, relying on them to make a determination. I don't know why it can't be spelled out in black and white.
So, yeah. I mean, the court upheld the town's interpretation that I don't think it was open to interpretation. The Director of Inspectional Services said that the keeping of animals was not permitted in R1, and the court agreed with that. The regulation allows the Board of Health to issue a permit. So even in an R2 zone, if you can't prove to the Board of Health that you would be a responsible animal owner, you would be denied a permit. That decision could be appealed, but it would be spelled out in the regulation. So the board would have the authority to make a judgment call on whether somebody's presenting an adequate application.
All right, so I still see some vagueness here. So in Article 7, and I'm looking at the booklet here, the warrant and the explanation report. So in paragraph 5, where it talks about the board will seek to balance one's ability to keep animals while minimizing nuisance-like issues like poor setups that create for neighbors. So I'm thinking odors, waste management, noise. So when it says minimizing, that to me is open to interpretation. So if you're in a butter, you may feel that any type of impact is significant. So minimizing is kind of, it's semantics, I think. Let's get, also in the current bylaw where it talks about animal husbandry, it has specific definitions. So for example, I'm looking at section 40, definitions 40.2, zoning bylaws, February 10th, 2020. It talks about accessory uses, feeding stations, waste storage, disposal areas, as well as the animals themselves, I believe, that have to be 15 feet from an abutting residential lot line. It also talks about the size of animals. In excess of 15 pounds, that would require a special permit. So in the article, the proposed change deletes that. It actually deletes animal husbandry definition. And it's not really replaced with anything that has the same kind of definitions in terms of setbacks, not for structures, structures like pens or not stables, but holding areas. We're talking about the animals themselves. It looks like this new bylaw would allow animals to come right up to the property line. So if someone was enjoying a summer evening in their backyard, they could have an animal, a large animal, in close proximity to them. And to me, that interferes with someone's ability to enjoy their property. Is that a fair assumption that there is no definition for how close animals can be to someone's property, to an abutter's property?
Steve? Aaron, do you want to jump in? I do. I mean, the setbacks vary from R1 to 2 to 3, so they're not spelled out in the proposed language changes, but they are spelled out elsewhere in the bylaw with respect to what the setbacks are. But Aaron, I don't know if you want to, I guess the question is, if you have a fence up against your property line, could the animal be outside of a pen and up against that property line? I'm not sure if you have an answer.
I guess I through you, I think the answer could be yes, but again, I think the Board of Health, where we don't have any review of that situation today, under this set of regulations, the Board of Health would be reviewing a proposal, and again, if it's a large animal that might be able to reach over the property line and into an abutter's property, my guess is that would be viewed negatively by, we're not contemplating that, and again, I think the bylaw uses a blanket 15, whereas in these districts, the setbacks vary, so I feel like we might have actually strengthened the requirement to ensure that they're never closer than the setbacks. But again, if there's a fence that you're using as an enclosure that's on your property line, that would be part of the review process. I don't see that as a change from the status quo. And again, I think given that we're reviewing that, again, if it's a large animal that likes to reach across, horses can sometimes reach through the fence and get to the grass on the other side. I would imagine that that would be a criteria that we would look at in the evaluation of that proposal. I know oftentimes you'll see a horse fence with a slightly electrified wire on the top of that to prevent that horse from reaching over. So again, there might be something like that where there might be a condition put on such approvals. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, Mr. Duggan, but.
All right, so just one last point on this article, and then I'm going to move to the Appendix F. So when we look at bylaws, especially zoning bylaws, me personally, I like to consider what's the worst case scenario. Like not what's like typical, but what would be allowed by right that would totally be over the top in terms of impact to abutters. Could it be like a cow, living pretty close? I'm in R1, so I'm really looking at it from an R1 perspective, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 square foot lots. And I'm not hearing anything that animals have to be kept 15, 20, 25 feet away from the property line. Other towns do make that distinction. So we're talking about noise, odors, insects, vermin, waste runoff. That has a significant impact on people's quality of life, especially in the summertime when you have your windows open, you're trying to enjoy some peace and quiet. and someone's deciding they're going to be running a farm operation within a few feet of your home. That's really above and beyond what should be allowed. And as town meeting members, that's one of our responsibilities, to make sure that our residents have a good quality of life, and we try to improve it every day. This goes in the opposite direction. All right, so I'm kind of done with that. Now for Appendix F, and that was what was approved by the Board of Health, I think back in February, and then I think they approved some slight changes recently within the past month or so. So it's comprehensive, but I actually found this. This is boilerplate text that I found online at mafoodsystem.org. It's called Model Livestock Ordinance.pdf. And all you do is just plug in the name of your city or town, and this is what the result is. So this isn't something that people spend countless hours kind of coming and formulating and discussing. They just downloaded it and just populated it with the word Danvers. So really it has little value, I think. And I think that's about it for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If you could just disinfect your microphone as you return to your seat. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Could I ask, in regards to that, the regulations of the Board of Health, those are not under consideration by either us or the town meeting at this point, is that correct?
Correct. Are there any other citizen comments? Yes.
Nova Samade, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. I would actually like to put my support for this warrant out there. I think that this is just a good way to level the field across the town and give everyone in town the right to keep animals that may be pets, maybe them, but if it depends upon the size of our lots, if the Board of Health feels that they can regulate this, then I don't see any reason why some of us should regulate that just people in R2 are allowed to do this. It doesn't make any sense to me. It should be based upon size of lot, location, and plus I see that the permit would expire at the end of the year, so it would have to be a new permit every year. So if there's problems, they cannot get another permit or such. So anyway, I support this.
Thank you. If you could just disinfect your microphone. Thank you. Any other citizen comments? Mr. Bates.
Thank you. Bill Bates, Precinct 4, Town Meeting Member. You know, I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on this. I have some concerns. One of the concerns I have is that we are giving an awful lot of authority to the Board of Health, which is a 3-member board, appointed, not elected, and I'm just not sure, as somebody else mentioned, whether they're going to be able to handle the disagreements. Mr. Landis just mentioned that the Appendix F is not up for review with the town meeting warrant article. Well, that's a good thing, because it kind of, they disagree with each other. We talk about household pets in the warrant article, and then they list some examples of those. And then if you look at the Board of Health regulations, they have domesticated animals that are still some of the same animals listed. So I'm confused, you know, are we talking horses, cattle? When you look at the Board of Health regulations, it says domesticated animals, and that's those are included, and then goat, sheep, and then you also have dog and cat, which is included in a household pet. So I think we need some more work on this, and I like I say, I'm concerned, maybe we could do something where there's another board involved. Maybe we could ask that the Board of Appeals take a look at a permit, as well as the Board of Health, and work in conjunction. I just think this needs some work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizen comments? Anything else from the board?
Move the question?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
The article passes. Next, we're going to move to Article 6, a citizen's petition. Is the petitioner here? Mr. Lucy?
Good evening. Sorry. This article has, we discussed it today, and by the way, just so you know, this morning I sent the chairman a message that I'd like to talk to him today about the language of the article. I was then in the middle of sending a second message to say, oh, and by the way, I'm available all day, but before I could even hit send, my phone rang. So, thank you. I sent the message and my phone rang within 30 seconds, so that's how responsive the chairman is.
And excuse me, Mr. Lucy, I meant to begin by pointing out that there is a typographical error in the article, and I would like to correct that for the record
Thank
now.
you. Yep.
That the article should read, to see if the town will vote to authorize the use and display of the thin blue line flag on fire or other public safety apparatus, or take any other action thereon. That last part was inadvertently removed. We apologize for that. It will be reflected correctly in the FinCom recommendations, of course. So our apologies for the typographical error, but please continue.
All right, then thank you again for the prompt phone call and for that action. That was basically the content of our discussion this morning. In terms of the article itself, I don't think there's anyone in probably the North Shore that reads a newspaper or doesn't live in hiding somewhere, that isn't aware of what this article is about and where it came from. There are probably a much lower number that understands the work we've done in the past few weeks with outreach to our Board of Selectmen, and with a group we're working with me tonight are former Officer Mike Hagan, Mark Zubrick, Jim Morose, Brian Farmer, Doug Bean, the Honorable Doug Bean, and Rick Betancourt. I think that's, did I miss anybody? We've been keeping our eyes open, our ears open, and really our hearts open, and we've learned quite a bit about the issue, about where people stand on the issue, and we are hopeful, very hopeful, that we can come to I wouldn't even call it a compromise. I think it's really a better solution at tomorrow night's Board of Selectmen meeting. So with that, I'll take any questions if someone has them on the article. But I doubt there'll be any. But anyways, that's all I really had to offer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Landers.
So I think we're faced with the article as written, and I appreciate the fact that the group that is working with you has attempted to reach out to people and reach some sort of compromise. But honestly, that's of no importance to us in our analysis. In this particular situation, sometimes you can't even get to the point where you worry about what your own feelings are with an issue. And in this particular instance, the decision by the town council to make the determination that this particular article as written goes beyond the scope of the authority of town meeting, and that it would run afoul with the Town Manager Act. And at best, and this is the one area, not that my opinion of what the town council says is of any importance except to me, but the one area that I would not agree with him is that the town meeting is allowed to make some type of an advisory determination out of this particular warrant article. So based on that and based upon both the Town Manager Act as amended in 1997 from the original 1949 Town Manager Act, and also having read through the decision that he provided us from the appeals court, I don't think that we have any option as a board, regardless of what you might believe any other way, that we have any other option but to vote no action on this and to forward that recommendation to the town meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow up. You mentioned, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Landers, you mentioned the 1997 revised version of the Town Manager Act and an appeals court decision?
Yeah, he mentions the appeals court decision, which is the Shirtliff versus the City of Boston case.
Okay.
Yeah.
I invite you to, if I could, please watch the Selectmen's meeting from October 6th when I discussed what that Shirtliff decision is. And if I...
Well, I've read the decision. I've also read the district court decision. Right. I've run my own, as an attorney, my own view of how that particular case plays out. Now, the one thing I don't know is whether or not there's been certiorari has been granted on that case with the Supreme Court. My Westlaw is not available to be able to look at these things. Right. I don't believe it has. And even if it did, because the two cases that are most significant that they work with on it, the first one deals with monuments, the second one deals with license plates, I would say to you that the flag analysis is much closer to the license plate case out of Texas. And so that particular case, although I think, again, the idea that these flags would be flown from apparatus as opposed to would put it much closer and almost identical to the Supreme Court decision in the license plate case. So even if they were to make a determination at the Supreme Court, which again I don't believe that they're going to, because I don't believe that they have granted certiorari on this case, but even if they were to grant that and to look at this and to overturn the appeals court case with it, it would not overturn the case from 4 years earlier that dealt with the Texas license. It was Texas license plates. Might have been Louisiana, but whichever one it was. And so in that particular situation, I don't think there's any possibility that what we're dealing with here is not a governmental action, and that it would not be viewed in any way, shape, or form as a forum, which is the distinction that needs to be made in terms of these types of free speech cases. But even beyond the free speech component of it, we don't even have to, I bring that up because it was more or less interesting to go through that analysis with it, but I don't think you need to get to that analysis, Keith, because the Town Manager Act of 97 is very specific in terms of who the authority is vested with it.
And that's really what I wanted to address, was that part of your comment beyond the Shirtliff case. The Shirtliff case grants the right for the city council to say no. And I fully agree with it. They have the right to say no. The town manager has the right to say no. The Board of Selectmen has the right to say no. And town meeting also has the right to say no. In conjunction with the Town Manager Act that everyone refers to so often, the Town Manager Act, originally of 1949 and later most recently revised in 1997, does not do away with the town charter. And that's what I went through at the October 6th meeting of the Board of Selectmen. Those two documents live together. The town charter is what creates this board itself.
No, that's not true, Keith. We were actually created as an amendment to the 1930 town charter in the 1997 Town Manager Act.
There's two separate documents, Mike.
But that section of 1930 was rescinded with the 1997. Read it, Keith. It was.
Okay, I'll go back and look. But there are many things that go on in this town government that are not addressed by the Town Manager Act that are still, the Town Manager Act did not replace the 1930 special town meeting. The legislation that created a representative town meeting in the town of Danvers.
Well, we're gonna have to agree
My
to
point was
disagree
this.
with that. And
anyways, I didn't want to get into an argument tonight. I did want to say a lot of the concerns some of the concerns Mike just brought up about.
It's not a concern, Keith. It's what I'm telling you is that the town council made that determination, and under The Town Manager Act, we go to the town council for opinions. That's part of his, and he's provided an opinion to us that this particular action goes beyond the scope of town meeting, and that is what we're left with.
Okay, again, we're gonna have to disagree on that, because I believe the town manager, town meeting still retains the, in the language of the original Representative Town Meeting Act, retains all rights of the municipal corporation. And that was not taken away by the Town Manager Act. Now, if we do want to continue down this road, I will mention you were around in 2005 with the other fire truck issue, when the town manager went against a town meeting act, a town meeting vote, right? And he claimed under the Town Manager Act, 13L, he had, or 13H rather, that he had that right. 13H, I'm sorry, I got him backwards now. But anyway, I did not come here tonight to make this argument. But my point is this: we have moved past all this, and we are working to create a solution that makes this article moot. Okay? And that's what we're hoping to achieve before the 26th. So,
Well, but the unfortunate part with that, Mr. Chair, is, and I appreciate that, and I hope that happens.
Yeah.
But we don't have that in front of us. That's not our
No.
purview. And again, based on, and this is like my opinion, the rest of the board has a right to be able to make the determinations based on whatever else they want. But I would say that based upon the decision of the town council, who under the Town Manager Act provides opinions in these particular areas, and has made a determination that this goes beyond the purview and runs afoul of the Town Manager Act. And again, everybody is allowed to have their own opinion, I guess, on that, but our opinion comes, our legal opinion comes from our town council, and that's who we are required to listen to. Now, I happen to agree with his interpretation of it, but again, that only matters to me. It doesn't, I'm not here acting as the attorney for the town or anything else. And, but that he is, and he's made that determination, and because we can only act on what we have, not what prospectively, hopefully may happen, again, I will make the argument that we are left with no choice but to vote a recommendation of no action on this.
Thank you. Paul?
Well, I happen to agree with Mr. Landers, the second paragraph. And after looking at this for the last couple of weeks to months, I was a little concerned that we had to restore either respect or support. And I've been on this committee for quite a few years. I've been a town meeting member, and I've lived in this town since 1981, and I don't ever recall the police, the fire, first responders, town employees, town administration ever being shown a lack of support. So I feel that we're just talking in circles right now. I will obviously not support this petition, and I will agree with Mr. Landers that a vote of no action should be taken. Thank you.
Sally Kearns? It's on.
I agree that the opinion of our legal counsel is important. I support the manager's decision, like Paul, like everyone I have talked to over the past several weeks. My brother was a police officer for 30 years in this town. I'm proud to serve alongside police officers on the Human Rights and Inclusion Committee, and we talk about how we can make our town a place where everyone feels respected and welcomed. And I feel I don't appreciate being made to feel that if I don't support a flag on the back of the fire truck, that I somehow don't support police. And I concur with what Paul said. We all support our police. I think the manager did the right thing. feeling it was a divisive symbol. Clearly it was, because here we are talking about it. So I vote no action.
Thank you. Mike?
It's a noble thing that the people are trying to do, the citizens petition. But let me just give you a quick story. Many years ago, when one of the 3 times or 4 times I was summoned for jury duty, I went up to the sidebar with the 2 lawyers and the judge, and one of them asked me a question. He said, one of the police officers is going to be testifying today. Would you fully believe the police officer? And I says, absolutely, I always believe the police officer. And next thing I heard was number 23, juror, you're excused. Another time, years ago, my electric dryer caught fire down the cellar. And it was a snowstorm. And it was 12 inches of snow coming down, plus a couple of feet that were out there. It was a big snowstorm. And God bless, the old fireman came running through the front door of the house, down the cellar stairs, right to the dryer, put it right out. They were right there. And I've had instances where I've had to use them for other emergencies. So God bless the first responders. God bless all of them. Years ago, the swastika was a sacred Indian signal, and then it was eventually adopted by the Boy Scouts. But unfortunately, a guy by the name of Hitler kind of messed it up, so nobody wants to use it anymore. It's a sad thing that this flag has antagonized or made people fearful, some people in town, about using it. So I guess the best thing I can say is that we should pass this along with no action to the 149 big people on the town meeting floor. And that's the way I'm going to vote. Thank you.
Sally Calhoun?
Thank you. Well, you know, as I've been watching this all unfold in a remote way, you know, through the newspapers, et cetera, I keep thinking, boy, good, you know, good for us, good for all of us to be able to stand up, talk about something that's near and dear and close to our hearts, agree, not agree, but we can do it. We can talk about it. We can bring issues out into the open. I think good work has been done in these past weeks that show us that we belong to one another, we care about one another, we're one another's neighbors and friends, and we care about each other. So I hope that however it all rattles out, shakes out in the end, that we all feel that we won something important. That's what this process is. So I think all of us have done a really good job, and I'm proud of it, all the people who've been involved in it.
Thanks, Sally. Ted?
I think I echo what Sally and Mike said, is that we're forced, you know, regardless of what you guys plan to talk about tomorrow night, we're forced to vote on what's written in front of us. And what's written in front of us is effectively an ultimatum that says, if you don't support this, you don't support our first responders. And after watching the debate for the last 2 months or however long it's been, I think it's pretty clear, no matter how people want to insist otherwise, that reasonable people can disagree on this particular flag. I don't think the town manager was out of line for acknowledging that. The American Legion Americanism Commission in 2017 expressly said they do not endorse or recommend this flag. The American Legion is the author of the United States Flag Code. I don't think anybody that serves the American Legion disrespects first responders, and I think the vast majority of them probably were first responders. At least all of them were veterans. So whatever you guys plan on working out, I think it needs to show some flexibility in the symbol that you want to use to honor our first responders that other people can support with cleaner conscience. That's it.
Thanks, Ted. Are there any citizens' comments? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Powers, Precinct 6. I rise and fully support all of the comments of the Finance Committee. The one thing I do hope happens is we take a vote on this article on town meeting floor. Why? Because this is gone, it's purely a political issue at this point. It's a political issue manifest by some, in my opinion, very bad behavior on the organizers, a fire official, and a police officer. One of each. There were many, many, many other first responders in this town who, in my opinion, are ultimate professionals. They go to work. They agree to provide a service in exchange for training, equipment, and a salary with which they can raise their family and live a quality life. They are being painted by this same brush. They are being painted unfairly by the actions of a few. And I believe it's imperative that you as a finance committee and we as a town meeting body reject those actions. I also fully support the efforts by the Board of Selectmen, the town manager, and other actions that will be coming in terms of committees and studies, managerial objectives. All of that is appropriate to provide adequate recognition to our first responders, who, again, I just want to reiterate, the vast majority are professional people who really want nothing to do with this. Now, personally, I say that, and I bring this up because it's come up in other town meetings. I am the son of a Danvers police officer, long, long time ago. I am the father-in-law of a police officer on the North Shore. I am the father of an infantry officer in the United States Army. None of those people look at this with any favorability at all. I also am married to a healthcare provider who, through this coronavirus epidemic, has walked into her building daily with dozens and dozens of cases. Face that danger, manage a staff of over 100, and provided quality service. Those people are heroes as well. Those people deserve recognition. And I think, I hope, with the town manager's actions over the next year, we will develop an appropriate system where we can acknowledge those frontliners in the medical profession. The first responders do an admirable job. When there are sick people, they treat them at the scene, they triage, they deliver them to the hospital, or to the assisted living, or to the nursing home. For the next 2 to 6 to 8 months, those medical people work with the sick face to face. Rotary did an outstanding job with the little essential workers signage that we all could purchase and put on our lawns. I bought 3. I have an ER room nurse, a Mass General nurse, and a nursing home administrator. 1, 2, 3. All of them go out daily. Not looking for any acknowledgement, but doing the job that they had to do. So my point is, there is heroism everywhere in our community. I feel it unfortunate that a small group selected first responders, choosing a symbol that obviously has many different meanings to different people, and in fact has been hijacked as a straight political symbol, and put this community through the events that we have had to watch over the past few months, and that still occur in Danvers Square on a weekly basis. We have got to the point where we have inadvertently rolled out the welcome mat to the Confederate flag. Now, I know it was an adolescent from out of town that brought it in. But for the fact, can any of you imagine, before this movement, anybody even thinking of partaking or displaying any of those activities that we've seen down there? I say no. So as a community, we have to resoundingly reject this while working on a compromise, while working on a better plan to move forward. And finally, that plan has to recognize the people who feel threatened by this symbol, the people who stepped up at first and called it to our attention. We, as a community, have to work to be totally inclusive of all of those people. And I believe we can start that with a strong rejection or a strong support of your no action vote, which sounds pretty clear that's where you're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Judge Bean. No. Oh, and if you could please clean the microphone.
My apologies, Mr. Chief.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Good evening. Doug Bean, Precinct 4, not a town meeting member. I want to say a couple things. First of all, I thought this young lady here was exactly right, that what we have had these last couple months is a vigorous conversation, and I think it was a good thing. Now, tonight we heard a lot of back and forth between Mike Landers and Keith Lucy on the different legal things. Now, as a lawyer and a judge, I found it fascinating. I may be the only one. But really, I just want to say that I think the process has been good for the town. We've had a vigorous discussion, and I think that a resolution for all parties is within reach. I expect, and I think everybody in this room expects, no action to carry the day on Article 6. I support that, we support that, and I hope that in the coming days we have something worked out that everyone can agree with, and I think we can do that.
Thank you. If you could just clean the microphone. Mr. Zubrick. And Mr. Zubrick, if you could keep your mask up, please.
Well, you're not going to be able to hear me then.
I bet we'll hear you just fine.
Oh, okay. Keep your mask up.
That's the law.
Whose law?
I don't know.
Who made that law?
It doesn't matter, but if you could keep your mask up and continue, please.
I keep it up.
Above your nose, please. Thank you.
This is a...
God bless America.
I know. It's sad, but it's happening.
What's sad about it, Mark?
What's sad about it?
Yeah.
If we could just keep the conversation to the warrant article, please. Thank you.
I will do that. I just want to say very few words because I don't want to prolong this thing because we understand where it's going. And as you know, our citizens' petition to restore respect to the first responders was generated over a few days, 450 people, residents, that signed the petition. It is on the agenda. The wording on the article itself is wide open, a flag. At one time, at some of the meetings that we've attended with the Board of Selectmen, we had questions on which flag was it. So what we want to do is we want to clarify this. And the one good thing about this petition was that it generated meaningful communications with comments from all segments of our community. We and you and the Board of Selectmen and the residents have heard, we want to hear them, and we want to communicate that back to the government in this town. This petition aroused a significant response by residents, many for the flag, but also some against the flag and against the process that was used. As a result, we wanted to listen and understand differing opinions and reached out for solutions outside of our immediate circle. You know, when you agree on something and you're surrounded by people that agree with you, it's very easy to convince yourself that, hey, that's the right thing. We need to step out and listen to everyone. Because in conclusion, what we have here is that our community, and it includes all of us, has always been respectful and responsive to the needs of all our residents. And that's the only thing I want to say, because I think we have a solution. It'll come out at tomorrow's selectmen's meeting, and we want to be receptive to their comments and your comments as well. That's why we're listening to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could just wipe down the microphone.
Oh, Mike.
Especially since you simply refuse to put that over your nose, don't you, Mark?
It falls off my beard, and it's keeping my beard.
Everybody else is able to seem to do it.
Okay.
Mr. Betancourt?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Rick Betancourt, Town Meeting 5. I've been a very vocal proponent of the thin blue line flag for a variety of reasons. Being the son of a police officer, and my father, who served 35 years, and I've mentioned this story many times, is he did a lot of good for the town of the city of Peabody. Was even involved in his own fatal shooting back in '86. So for me, it's quite personal. I wanted to, Mr. Daly, reference the symbolization, or the hijacking of symbolisms. I know in this town I have seen many people wear Seattle Mariners, Oakland A's, Georgetown Hoyas, Minnesota Twins, San Francisco 49ers, Pittsburgh Pirates, Houston Astros, and the Chicago Bulls, Cincinnati Reds, Los Angeles Dodgers. Every single one of those individual symbols, professional sports teams, has been hijacked by gangs such as the Maniac Latin Disciplines of Chicago, the Norteños of Northern California, the Latin Kings of Chicago, People's Nation Chicago, as well as the Bloods, the Puro Tango Blast. These are all verifiable through various law enforcement communities where symbols such as hats or symbols such as shirts have been hijacked, allegedly hijacked, yet we still see them out and nobody makes a stink about it. It's not an issue among them. And the reason why it's not an issue, and I feel bad for a lot of the people that believe that this symbol has been hijacked, and it's really not their fault. It's the media-driven narrative that we see oftentimes where they make associations of police brutality or whatnot, and I understand that, and it's a very difficult thing to fight against. But Attorney Landers probably knows of the Bureau of Justice, and they do a Bureau of Justice statistics every year. Every 4 years they do a study. They do a study of 50 million police and public interactions over the age of 16. 50 million. And I have to say, unequivocally, that over probably 95% of those have not engaged in any sort of police brutality or murder, as they say. And so the media has driven, but we're in a time where everything is social media, what's in our phone, what's in our hands, what's on our computer, whatnot. Clips are being modified from 3-minute clips down to 30-second clips to give information that's not true and factual. And I try to bring up statistics all the time is to try to support my narrative or refute what I'm going to say. And as a committee, we're all for, we understand the no action, and that was expected. And we worked very hard to try to find a way collectively to hear what many of the community has been very supportive, and there's been some that have not been very supportive. And we hope that what we've done is favorable. But I would like to simply say, Mr. Daly, that I don't believe it's appropriate to utilize the spot sticker as in association with what this symbol is. That tyrant, that evil man, murdered 12 million people, not just 6 million Jews, 12 million, because there was 5.5 million other political prisoners and whatnot. But that's not a fair representation of the thin blue line flag that my father...
You didn't get my point. My point was that
it's
been stolen.
The hijacking of a symbol, I understand,
Right.
by the Native Americans, but I would disagree respectfully in this particular situation that it is not a politically hijacked symbol, and that's a narrative that is being improperly discussed, and I think some people have latched onto it. But I think when you look at what our law enforcement community has done across, this is something that they've gathered under, many of them have. I've seen it at funerals, numerous funerals of law enforcement officers that have given their lives, and you see that thin blue line flag either on a coffin, on a flower arrangement, or hanging from a fire truck, or whatever it is. So I just wanted to say that I disagree with the association of symbolism in this particular situation, and I've clearly proven that there are other symbols that have hijacked by criminal activities in the United States that are responsible for far more deaths, yet we see them every single day. And that's all I wanted to say, but I appreciate, Chairman, you're letting me speak, and I'll wipe this down, and I appreciate all the hard work that you guys have done, and I really do hope that we can find an amicable solution that's going to work for everybody in town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Betancourt. Are there any other citizens' comments? Anyone else from the board? Oh. Priscilla?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I wasn't going to speak, but I'm Priscilla Curta, Precinct 4, town meeting member, and here in the Richmond building. What was the Richmond building when I came down here from Wadsworth School many, many years ago. And I will say on the record that I do approve of what the town manager has done. But what bothers me most, and many of my friends that I have talked to, is the flag. And I just don't like the idea of changing our flag from the way it stands, the beautiful red, white, and blue. And many years ago, when I came down here to the Richmond building from 7th grade and moved into the 8th grade. In the 8th grade, we got a new principal. His name was Frank Pickard, and he had just served, I believe, in the Army from World War II. We had an assembly, his first assembly with all of us, and we got there, came time to salute the flag, we all stood up. I don't know how many looked at the flag or anything, we repeated our flag salute, and we sat down. Then he said to us, "Stand up," and we all stood up again. And he said, "Now salute the flag the way you should mean to it." And I've never forgotten that. It just reminded me so much of what our national flag stands for. And it happened right here in this building. Just a little history. Thank you.
Thank you. What's the will of the board?
Move to vote, no action.
Second.
All in favor of a vote of no action on Article 6?
Aye.
Opposed? Votes unanimous. Article 1, Transportation Network.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Article 1, Transportation Network. Several years ago, the Department of Public Utilities introduced a per-ride assessment on hail rating, boy, I've twisted my tongue on that one. When you need an Uber or a Lyft or something of the like, there is a small fee that is assessed by the state, and per the regulation, the assessment for fees that originate within a particular municipality are sent back to that municipality. 3 years ago, in 2017, the town received roughly $8,700 under this program. At that time, the regulations had not been set yet, so it flowed. We actually put it into the transportation fund that we're talking about tonight. Subsequently, the regulations were put in place, and there is a town meeting action required to appropriate those funds. So staff is recommending that the 2-year total of $28,824.80 be moved out of the holding account where it's currently sitting and into the transportation fund with the senior center that we use to subsidize and offset the cost of providing services to our at-risk and populations that need a lift. So based on the trending, $8,700 was the appropriation in 2017. Of the $28,000, $12,000 was from 2018. 2019 was $16,000. So it is trending up. We don't know what our 2020 numbers will be until sometime next year, but we can imagine this will be an annual request to move this money into that fund.
Thank you. Ted?
Are these funds, are they additional appropriations, or is it money that, are we using it to fund existing budget?
So this offsets the cost to run the program. So it gives us the ability to charge.
So it's subsidizing what was
Correct.
already in our plan. That's it. Thank you.
Sally?
I have no question, thank you.
Mike?
No questions.
Sally?
No questions, thank you.
Paul?
Should we, would we be able to get through the year with this, Steve? This movement of money?
Yes, there's a balance in that account. Our finance director is in the room. Off the top of my head, I don't know what that is, but this is a fund that we've been keeping a close eye on because the fund balance has been in decline the last couple of years. There was some discussion about starting to charge fees rather than take donations. This certainly, this is a fund that needs it. We like to be able to provide free rides. But I don't know, Ronnie, if you happen to know what the current balance is there or what the trend is.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I believe the current balance is around $45,000, but that's dwindled over the past several years. So again, this fund allows us to put off the conversation on how we long-term rectify the fund, at least for a couple more years.
Thank you.
Yep.
All set.
Mike?
No, nothing.
Great. My only comment, Mr. Town Manager, would be a concern that during the pandemic, rideshare services have really plummeted, and that next year we might see a significant drop in that revenue stream.
And so we don't have any expenses tied to this revenue.
Okay.
But as Mr. Connolly said, that eventually, if that fund balance continues to decline, we may have to look at charging for those rides, and we'd like to avoid that if we can continue to find funding mechanisms to offset the cost.
Sally, you have a question?
If I may, so this was created in 2018, the funding through a fee on Uber and Lyft, right?
Well, we did receive funds in 2017 under this program, but with the regulations in place, there's an appropriating requirement. Is that correct, Ronnie?
Yes, that's correct. In 2017, we were able to deposit it directly into the Senior Transportation Fund. As of 2018, they require a vote of the town meeting to appropriate the funds.
Okay, but it says here that the DPU in 2018 introduced a per-ride assessment fee on Uber and Lyft.
So
So-
That may be stated a little bit incorrectly. What happened in 18 was a requirement to appropriate the funds. So we did receive the funds prior to 2018. It goes on to say the state requires municipalities to appropriate these funds for transportation-related purposes, so.
Okay.
That's the difference.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
not stated as clearly as it should be.
Okay, thanks.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, fellow Finance Committee members. I stand here as the president of the Friends of the Council on Aging to tell you that there was a shortfall in the transportation fund that we use to take people shopping, medical appointments, supply the buses. The Friends donated funds last year by selling raffle tickets to win gift certificates from the restaurants. The restaurants supported it. We had over 100 gift certificates. We raised funds and went straight to the transportation fund. The Friends also gave the senior center funds to build and make chicken pot pies that they sold at the, what do you call it? Farmers Market, thank you very much. So the Friends and the Senior Center have been constantly raising funds to subsidize, and they're very happy to be able to get these funds and just pay for the transportation of the seniors. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could just wipe the mic, Dan. Any other citizens' comments?
Well,
Sally?
Dan, while you're tidying up at the microphone.
Yep.
So where does the money come from for the ride program that you're referring to take seniors shopping and whatnot? Is that all raised?
There's a $3 fee in town, $5 out of town. It's a donation that some seniors pay. If they don't have the funds, they don't pay it, but they still get the ride.
But is there an appropriation?
Nope. Well, some of the costs associated with the program are through the general fund, some of the staffing that's shared between the programs, but it is set up essentially to be self-supporting through the combination of the donations and revenue streams like this. But as with a lot of our programs, we have senior center staffing that provides support services to the program.
Okay, thank you.
It's not self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else from the board? Is there a motion?
Move the article.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Article passes. Article 2, supporting first responders. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This article was requested by the Danvers Select Board and supported by a vote of 5-0 at their review of this warrant. Two of the Select Board members are here tonight. I believe this was an alternative to or an opportunity to express in words the respect and support that this town has always had for its first responders without the association with the symbol that is later referenced in Article 6. So this was supported unanimously by the board at their meeting. And I don't know if either of the board members wants to elaborate on that, but that was my understanding.
Wow, that's a hot mic. In response to the obvious controversy we talked about in the other warrant article, the selectmen got together, and I thank the chairman for leading the charge before the select board vote to acknowledge that the Danvers obviously respects our police officers. The narrative that was raised about returning respect was based on the ultimatum, as someone said tonight, of either this flag or you don't respect. And we aren't going to buy into that narrative. We want to make sure that all the first responders of this town understand that as a board and as we believe the town meeting will, want to affirm our deep respect for the hard work that they do, that they do indeed put themselves in a chosen profession, but they do put themselves on the line, and their profession is one of danger often, and we respect that. and that this was in some means, a counterbalance to the other article that inferred that we did not respect him in some manner because of our support for the town manager's actions or the surrounding comments. So we respectfully ask, as you can see here, in the narrative, it does talk about the two different flag designs, and I think that's an important distinction people should know. We have, since 2018, had the blue-black symbol on fire equipment and public safety equipment in respect for a fallen officer and in respect for the work that the first responders do. And that the other flag is the flag that we aren't supportive of, the American flag design. So we look to give the town meeting members an opportunity to affirm their respect and affirm their longstanding respect, not returning it, but affirming it in a manner that is untied to the other warrant article, that they can freely state what they want about how they feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Landers.
So as I said to you folks at the beginning, I didn't need to talk to you about my opinion about 6 because I felt as though there was a legal reason. I'm going to tell you my opinion right now. My father was the chief of police in this town. My great-great-grandfather was the chief of police in this town. My brother's been a police officer for 30 years. I spent 10 years as a correctional officer in which I saw more criminals in a day than they saw in their entire career. My father had a saying. You know what my father's saying was? Mike Pagan knows a lot of my father's sayings. My father said, you know how they thank me, Michael? They thank me by my check cashing every Thursday. I'm going to tell you right now, you want to know how we support our police officers? We support them by supporting the Quinn Bill. We support them by making sure that we support civil service when it comes to selection and promotions. We support them by making sure that they get the proper equipment. We support them by making sure that their families are provided with insurance that doesn't require huge deductibles and huge premiums. We support them by making sure that they get pay and that their detail pay stays the same. You come before me with those things and I'm going to support you every day, all year. I'm going to do the same for our firefighters, and I'm going to do the same for anybody else who's that works for this town. That's what I think. I'll support this, but I'm going to reiterate what my old man used to say. Show me the money, basically, when it comes to your support. If you really want to, and I'm going to tell you right now, because I know it for a fact, that there are people who have been so far behind all this stuff, they talk a big game about how they support our police officers. And I can assure you, they hate the Quinn Bill. They hate the fact that those guys are out there and gals are out there working details. They hate the fact that they want to diminish pay and benefits. So I'll support number 2, but I'm also going to tell you that I'm going to support those other things. I hope that our police officers, our firefighters, and our first responders go out and elect people who are going to do those types of things for them.
Thank you. Paul?
I will wholeheartedly support this article, and without any question, I also want to mention too, in fact, I want to repeat it, that there are other folks in town, employees, administrators, that we should continually support, and it's just because of all the things that the police and the fire and the first responders do, and all those that work for the town, with the town, to make this a better place to live, I appreciate them and I support them also. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally?
You know, we've learned so many things through this pandemic, and it's unfortunate that it took a public health and economic crisis to realize it. I've talked with people over the past few months, you know, a nurse, I was walking up Chase Street, and a respiratory therapist on Purchase Street. I think about the nursing home worker who prayed with my sister-in-law while her mother was dying in a nursing home. She couldn't be there, but God love her, that worker used her phone to have FaceTime and prayed with my sister-in-law. It was a beautiful thing. So I think we're all indebted to all of the first responders in this crisis. And, you know, it goes, of course, police and fire, but it also goes beyond it to nursing home workers, people walking up Holton Street because they have to walk out to 114 to get a bus to their shift, and they're probably working another job to make ends meet. So they have been heroic. I know, as Mike said, talk is cheap. I hope that we are appreciating these employees in all sectors, public, private, and paying them the wages that a hero deserves. So, thanks.
Thank you. Mike?
I fully support Article 3. The only...
Article 2?
I'm sorry, 2. The only suggestion I make is perhaps a banner could be made up similar to the ones that are flown in the middle of the square, saying, you know, the town of Danvers supports the fire, police, first responders. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally Calhoun?
I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ted?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Nova Samade, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. I'm in full support of this article. I did just have one technical question that I'm sure is not anything, but under number 2 in the article, it says to reaffirm its commitment to providing the training tools and equipment necessary to protect their health and safety and the health and safety of community members. This doesn't legally bind the town to approving any kind of budget that comes to okay, that's all. I was like, can they just come and go? And we said we'd do it, so we're doing it. No. Okay. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief and probably a little redundant, but we've started a process now where we're recognizing a variety of different vocations and people who are stepping up, as Sally said, during this COVID period and have been before the COVID and will be after. So I hope as this process kicks off, I want to go back to the inclusion comment, that we expand it and we include and we address all of those people deserving of our respect and deserving of our recognition. Perhaps not their paycheck, but certainly our respect. And Michael, I will say one thing. After my father left the police department, he went to the phone company. He was a lineman and then moved into management. And he was responsible back in the day for having all of the telephone conduit laid in town under the streets. He always required detail of Danvers police officers. And I know for a fact at various times he called your dad when he couldn't get one just to say, get somebody out here. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens' comments?
You're out. The meeting might be over. You're out of wipes.
Keith?
Before I finish on this podium, is going to be gone another day. I'm feeling confident, actually, I know that I can speak on behalf of the group that we were meeting with, that we 100% support this article, right? And it does seem a bit silly almost to have to say it, but I didn't know Chief Landers. I didn't know Mike Power's father, but I do know that they lived in a different time, right? If you talk to even Officer Hagan about what policing was like in 1972 versus 1982 versus 1992 and 2002 and up to today, it's much, much different than it used to be. It used to be that people would walk down the street, and not all, but the majority would respect the police officer. And I'm stunned at what I've seen out in that square when people drive by and yell things at us, about us, but that's okay. When they yell things about police officers, it really, really bothers me. And I just don't understand it. I mean, I've been supportive of the police officers for my life. I don't always respect everything they do, but every time I've had an involvement with them, they've been right. But one thing I did want to rise to discuss was Quinn bill, right? Two things about the Quinn bill. The state bailed on the Quinn bill years ago. In its wisdom, the town had negotiated that should that happen in the future, the town would be on the hook for the Quinn bill, and they are. That's a good thing. The Quinn bill's a good thing. It's under attack, so I ask. It's under attack locally. That there are efforts to get rid of it locally. Quinn bill might need some revision. One of the things that this pandemic has revealed is the maybe a new Quinn bill might be in order. A Quinn bill in which police officers receive stipend for advanced studies in sociology, social sciences, and those type of areas that are more and more in need. You read all the time about police officers are quickly having to become social workers when they arrive at a scene. And they're more than just first responders for medical needs and emergency needs, but now social needs. And so a new Quinn bill might be in order, and I know we have at least two potential future state representatives in the room. That'd be a wonderful thing to take from this meeting and this whole event. I appreciate the other members' comments about, debate and just. I think we've kept it as, and you said today that we've tried to keep it as civil and polite as possible, and I think we've done a good job. We've had insults slung at us, and we've been called all kinds of things, and we've moved our rallies to stay away from some of the undesirable elements that we didn't want to be part of, and so we've done our best. And hopefully, again, this article, of course, will. I guarantee you. If I could guarantee 100% support of any article at town meeting, I'll guarantee 100% support of this article. Although no, I know one that probably won't. So, and he's not in the room tonight. But what we're asking is, let's go further, and hopefully tomorrow night everyone stays tuned, and we can have a meaningful discussion with the Board of Selectmen and really go just that one more step further and make it a meaningful representative for the town of Danvers that could act as a model for really other cities and towns across the state and really across the country as to how this can go and how best to handle these situations. And I heard references to other first responders, whether they be nurses and doctors or whether they be firemen. And I think the model we have in place could actually accomplish that as well. It's not part of our proposal tomorrow night, but as we move forward, it certainly could. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the board? It's the will of the board.
Move Article 2.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Article 3, Wetlands Protection Bylaws Revisions. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to invite Aaron Henry up to the podium. While he's making his way up there, the narrative sort of says it all. This bylaw was adopted in 1988 and has not been updated since. And Aaron and his team, due to the pandemic, have had a good opportunity to catch up on a lot of old work, and this is the product of one of those efforts.
Go ahead.
Thank you. As Mr. Bartha mentioned, we tried to use a lot of the time when the building was closed to attack some of our regulations and bylaws, and the wetlands protection, the local wetlands protection bylaw was one of the ones that we were able to put time into. As alluded, it was adopted in 1988 and has not been revised since. We operate with a local bylaw that's kind of part and parcel of the state's Wetland Protection Act, which has been amended several times since 1988. So the bulk of the changes here are really intended to bring our local bylaw into consistency with the state's act. That said, the one area that we did change, looking at our permitting and the experience that both applicants and staff have had over the decades, was to try to, and I use the term streamline carefully because that doesn't mean it's to get to yes faster. It's really about clarifying expectations for both parties. Sometimes that means we've strengthened regulations, sometimes that means we've relaxed it. So we've introduced some terms regarding like riverfront and docks and piers that we feel strengthen the local bylaw, but we've also introduced minor projects because we see a lot of small projects associated with single-family, detached single-family homes that the current system really puts an onerous burden upon, when most of the time the state would allow us to handle that with a lighter touch. So again, a lot of these changes are simply to bring the local bylaw into conformance with where the state's at today, and also try to recognize some of the procedural changes that we think we can introduce under that scheme to make this process work better for all involved.
Thank you. Ted?
I don't have any questions.
Sally?
It seems like such a meaty change.
Yep.
It's hard for me to assess how it's different than what's there now. Can you give a little feel for how what's in Appendix A is different than what's in the bylaw currently?
As I mentioned, I think a lot of it is there's several definitions that the local bylaw does not discuss at all, but that are absolutely necessary to go through the process and that the State Wetlands Act does address. So we've had to insert a number of definitions and reconcile a number of definitions. I think the other big one that I would point out is there's a section, I apologize, I'm trying to find it. The major minor permit that starts, well, it doesn't have a page number, but under what is proposed, Section 4, scope and applicability, you'll see there we call out major and minor. Getting myself.
You mean Section 6,
Yeah, sorry,
not
I'm in the
minor?
wrong section there.
So if I can just interrupt you for just a minute. You say the definitions, so the definitions that are set out in the appendix are now more consistent with the state law? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
And I know one of the things you said was this language about minor projects. Can you give me an example of what you think of when you think of a minor project, or a minor project that would fit with this language, and then give me an example of one that's not a minor project? Again, just so I understand the scope.
So there are certain activities today. I'll say Woodvale is a neighborhood where we see a lot of filings because we have the Frostfish Brook running through that neighborhood. And
So that could be going across somebody's backyard?
Yeah, and because you're within 100 feet of that resource, you have to file if you're proposing any sort of soil disturbance within 100 feet of that resource.
For instance, planting?
A shed.
Okay.
A shed's a very common one. Again, that doesn't even maybe require a building permit, but because you might be placing footings on the ground, you do have to come before the Conservation Commission. And under this scheme, we would allow that to come in as a minor project as opposed to what the current scheme would classify that as, which would be a little bit more robust for ultimately something that doesn't require a great deal of mitigation to alleviate the potential impact on the resource area.
So would a minor project now, under this new language, be kind of more administratively reviewed, or without the formality?
They still have to go before the commission, but the amount of resources that the homeowner would have to put into getting to the commission would be decreased and a little bit more manageable for you. Again, larger developments that have a development team, that have people, we're not trying to make that appreciably easier for them to get through. What we really see a lot, and what we have to spend a lot of time on, is hand-holding a homeowner who has a very small project, doesn't have the benefit of an engineer, might be able, usually has to get us a plot plan, but that's really about all the expertise that they're bringing to the table, and that in and of itself is costing them, upwards of a couple $1,000s. So again, this is just trying to recognize that a lot of those projects, it's not hard to mitigate the potential impact on the resource without needing to bring in all of those resources and multi-page site plans and very in-depth stuff. I mean, we can do that with a silt fence and hay bales, and so trying to right-size this for a lot of the projects that we see.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Is this, would an application of shoring up the riverbanks by the town be included in here somewhere? I didn't see it. Or is that a separate entity?
No, that would be.
Because you got dredging here and so forth,
Yep.
but
Those
we're
would
all
be major
concerned down
projects.
the port with the riverbanks.
Yep, those would still be considered a major project. It would be, I'd be hard pressed to imagine how you could be working on a riverbank and not trigger a major.
But there's no, you have no methods in here on how to do that or anything, right? This is strictly enforcement of.
It's a good thing the town engineer's here, but I believe the Massachusetts stormwater policy would also instruct us on how we would attack some of those projects.
Yeah, you're also required to work on the riverbanks to file a Chapter 91 license, which is required by the state. So even though these new bylaws would ultimately be underneath the state standards, you'd still be required to file a notice of intent for working on the riverbanks.
So if the town finally got to the point where they could do something to stop the erosion from the banks along the Crane or the Port Rodders River, that you would go through the application process with the state to do that.
Correct, yeah, even if the town
And it would apply to this document that you've written up here.
even if the town were to do a project like that, we would still have to go through the same process as the homeowner.
Okay, thank you.
And in this one, that riverbank was a good example of where the state has a lot to say about that in the act, and the local bylaw doesn't have much. And so again, we're hoping what this is really doing is just clarifying how to navigate the process locally when faced with that situation.
Okay.
Sal?
One thing that I wanted to ask about, and maybe it's a typo, or maybe it's intentional. So under section 2, jurisdiction and activities subject to regulations, 1A, it lists, coastal wetlands, salt marsh, wet meadow, bog, swamp, vernal pool, spring, bank, reservoir, lake, pond, river or stream. It keeps going, beach, dune, estuary, coastal bank, yada, yada, yada. And then for number 2, it has that same, no person shall commence to alter lands within 100 feet of any. So this top one, you can't remove, fill, dredge, degrade, discharge, or alter the following areas, right? It has that whole list. But in number 2, it removes river. And similar to Mike, I'm thinking about our 5 rivers, Porter, Water, Crane, Danvers, I said Waters, and the Ipswich. Is that deliberate, or is it just?
Question, and I apologize, I can't answer you off the top of my head. I'd have to
That's
get my
okay.
head back into this where I was a few months ago. I'm gonna say it's intentional, but I wish I could give you a better
We
better
can follow
answer.
up later.
Yeah, I'll have to do that. I apologize. I'm trying to reread it now, and I don't want to make an off-the-cuff and incorrect statement. I apologize.
That's okay. Well, we can I'll follow up with you. And then, maybe this is not the time, but because it's in front of us, the 35-foot versus the 100-foot. I thought, my concern is that, naturally, as everyone here I'm sure agrees, we want to protect our, wetlands from encroachment and further erosion. And so is it 100 feet or is it 35? If 100 feet is what we've determined, or the law has determined is
So, and again, I think a lot of folks get caught up on this. The 100-foot line or 200 feet in the case of rivers is simply any activity within that area requires notice to the local conservation commission. It may also, so like the 35-foot is within the 100 feet, you're doing something within 100 feet. This establishes that at 35 feet to the resource is a no disturb area. So I could be at 75 feet and I'm jurisdictional. And then we get inside the buffer zones there, and then you get specific performance standards that come into play at the 50-foot and 35-foot line.
Okay. Does this change that substantially? Anything in here, anything in these changes?
The Conservation Commission desired to increase the buffer zones from 25 and 35 to 35 and 50.
Okay.
And that's, again, largely in keeping with where practice is going throughout the Commonwealth.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Paul? Just a quick question on, in the town with the rivers and the port and all that, where do we see most of the erosion, the troubling erosion that you're having to deal with on a year-to-year basis?
Well, certainly, we are experiencing some in the Crane River near the marina. We've been having to deal with that perennially, and I think I want to say that's been a decades-long struggle. I think, but the reality is there's erosion on Frostfish Brook that we've had to shore up that stream that runs through Woodvale. I'm not sure, and the town engineer is here. I know we've seen runoff from developments like Folly Hill on top of the hill, and we had some sedimentation coming down through the storm drain system and making it also into basically there was an outlet there on, and I forget which river the other one is, I apologize. Yeah, but there's been issues like that. So again, this kind of goes in part with the next article in that we're really just trying to strengthen that scheme to make sure that it's the easiest to catch runoff at the source. And so again, some of these standards are aimed at trying to reduce that, keep it out of the system, keep it out of the natural, out of the resource area so that we don't necessarily have to dredge every 20 years or so. I don't know that we'll be successful in that. There's a lot of non-point sources that are contributing to these issues, but we're trying to button them down the best we can. And I think even that some of the work we're doing under Article 4 that you'll talk about next speaks to that problem as well.
Do we have, and possibly it doesn't maybe speak to this article, but just out of curiosity from my standpoint, informationally, any areas, tidal areas that would directly affect the structures, homes, businesses in our area here down near the port?
Is the question, are you concerned that the
Am I
potential rise in sea level might have to property?
Just the erosion or sea level. I wasn't really thinking of sea level, but I probably will be in a few years. But are there any structures that are in danger now within the town because of tidal changes, et cetera?
Yeah, we do have some municipal infrastructure, and there's also residential properties that abut the rivers in town, cranes, porters, and waters that we have to protect and shore up. It's from bridges to utility stormwater and sewer pipelines that run along the coastline to our point source at Dodia Pump Station. So yes, we're constantly looking at ways to make sure we can align ourselves to be better prepared for those climate changes that are going to increase or possibly increase the erosion on the shoreline, and also want to protect those utilities that we have.
And shameless plug, I'll give a shout out to the Department of Public Works. Over the last couple of years, we've become a MVP community of municipal vulnerability preparedness to try to address some of those issues of repetitive loss and where we might be able to apply for certain grant assistance from the state where we have infrastructure that's at risk. So again, it's a multifaceted process that we're engaged in. And one more sidebar, I will just say, I think changes like you're seeing under Article 4, under Article 3, some of the changes we've even made to the planning board development rules and regulations are really trying to unify so that, again, I'll say streamlining, but it's one set of standards based on what, you know, the state has set out for performance standards, such that when you're at the planning board for site plan review, you don't have one set of standards when it comes to environmental protection, but it's slightly different standard if you were in front of the Conservation Commission, and potentially a slightly different one if you were in front of the engineering department with a stormwater permit. So again, we've really been trying to tighten that up and make sure that those discrepancies between the various avenues that you may be sent down when you do a development project are much more aligned and much more in unison. That way, again, it's easier for us to administer if it's a standard, and it's also easier for folks that are using our services to have one playbook instead of having potentially 3 or 4 different versions. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All set.
Thank you. Mike?
Aaron, if we can dig down a little bit on this change from the 25-35 to the 35-50.
Yep.
How many additional permits do you think will be necessitated because of the changes?
no additional permits, because we're not changing the jurisdictional.
Well, I know, but I know we're not going to change. Everybody's going to need a notice of intent, because obviously all those people would be within the 100 feet.
Correct.
But are we going to require more variances and special permits because of that, or are we?
We don't anticipate there being, again, an appreciable difference in the permitting load and what those, again, we're trying to use the permitting practices that we've seen over the last couple of decades to ensure that the projects that are occurring in the buffer zones that are small homeowner projects are able to get through that without having to bring in a team of engineers.
Yeah.
Again, there are small homeowners that ask us for large things that may require that, but, you know, the shed in the backyard, you know, the kind of the run-of-the-mill projects that we see, we don't anticipate that becoming an additional burden because we're increasing the buffer zone.
What do you think the number is in Woodville, of the number of homes in Woodville that are inside, have a portion of the property inside the 100-foot buffer zone?
Again, I'm going to look at Steve and maybe give me hundreds?
Yeah, I'd say easily hundreds. Anything that runs from Wenham, any house that abuts the river from Wenham Street to
I
Cabot.
mean, yeah, 40, probably maybe 50 or 60% of the houses in Woodville, right, would be that.
There's also, there's not just Rock Brook, there's also outshoots.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, and some of them are underground, frankly, that we don't even, but the,
There's a brook on the other side of town that captures a lot of folks. Again, they've kind of been channelized over the years, but they're running through a neighborhood, and the reality is those are pretty easy to mitigate. Most of the projects that you'll see for those properties affected are very easy to mitigate, and that's why we spend a lot of time trying to figure out major, minor to simplify that for folks.
I mean, I can tell you that I'm not exactly comfortable with the expansion of the 25, 35 to the 50. However, as a trade-off with the major, minor, Mr. Chair, I'm willing to support this because of that trade-off in this instance. So,
Thank you. Any citizens' comments? Matt?
Sorry, we're to the juice now.
Yeah, so you may have answered this on the definitions, for example, the do not disturb zone, so you just mentioned that. I think today it's 25 feet and we're extending it to 35 feet. And that Mass DEP allows the town to define these zones, I believe, that they're not a state regulations about what the distances are from the resource or from the actual wetland. Why are we extending it from 25 to 35? Does that put a kind of give the homeowner less ability to use their backyards if they are abutting the brook? What was the impetus to extend it? And I believe that the Concom actually allows some, not variance, but some flexibility that they're actually allowed to get into that no-build area and actually build sheds and do other alterations to the landscape. So just wondering what the purpose was of changing these definitions.
Just want to, yeah. And is that your only question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Cleanest area in town.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Really, if the site is already pre-existing and built, and it's yard and it's grass, this is really not, again, through that minor process, it's not going to have a great deal of impact for folks. I think what we're looking at, and we've talked a little bit about this at the end of summer, when we had a number of the land use boards come together and talk about our permitting practices and kind of some of the things that we're seeing. Going forward, a lot of the undeveloped sites out there, and there are still more than people like to think there are in town, this would probably have an effect on another large subdivision in that they'd be held to this 35 standard, but as Mr. Duggan alludes, there is a process to say, well, in this particular case, I need to go to 25 because there's a large tractor, you know, an old beat-up tractor in there, and I'd like to get in there and pull that out. So it's not that there's no ability to do this, but I think it's also looking down the road and understanding where we're going and what development will look like going forward. And I think we felt it important to, again, kind of be more consistent with not only the state's Wetlands Protection Act and where it's gone in the 30-odd years since we adopted our local bylaw, but also kind of recognize where best practices are right now throughout the Commonwealth. And we feel that those standards are much more in line with what the development, larger development community in the region will see when they go to neighboring towns. And we wanted to kind of fall in line with that.
Thank you. Any other citizen comments? Any other questions from the board? Is there a motion?
Move Article 3. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Article 4, Town Bylaw Amendment, Stormwater Management and Land Disturbance. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While Mr. Henry's cleaning and Mr. King is approaching, I'll buy them a little time. And Mr. Henry already addressed part of the rationale here, which is to get everything working synchronously with each other. But similar to the previous bylaw, the stormwater bylaw was adopted in 2011, and a lot has changed since then. So Mr. King and his team have spent a considerable amount of time this summer cleaning up this bylaw and getting it ready for review this evening.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. Just to give you, I'm sure you guys have already gone through Appendix B. You've seen the red line edits. There's quite a few of them, but I kind of just wanted to go through maybe some of the bullet points to answer maybe some of your earlier questions, and then obviously I'll take any more that you may have. So basically an introduction to stormwater. So right now we're under regulations by our MS4 permit. It's our NIFTY, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System General Permit. All municipalities in the Commonwealth are required to comply with this federal and state statutes, and regulations, and permits to address the impacts of construction due to stormwater. Like as Steve had mentioned, we established our bylaw in 2011 to provide reasonable guidance for site planning and control of stormwater, both during construction and post-construction. Ultimately, the goal of the original bylaw was to protect our local water bodies, our aging infrastructure, and also properties from the detrimental effects of uncontrolled stormwater runoff. And to give you a little bit of background, so in 2003, when the first NIFTY general permit was issued for the Commonwealth, between 2003 to 2008, municipalities were required to do annual reporting to the state and to the EPA. In between this time, the state and the federal government did start to make a few amendments and some changes. And then after 2008, they started issuing a couple new draft permits for municipalities to review. This is where a lot of towns started to see the EPA wanted more reporting, more control of stormwater runoff. They wanted towns to take a more hands-on approach with their own facilities and also the residential properties and commercial properties within their town. Ultimately, that led to numerous comments that led to a final draft in 2014, which then went through a legal process. A few of the municipalities in the Commonwealth did fight the upcoming permit. Ultimately, that was settled in 2016, and then 2018, year one of the permit was enacted for all the communities in Massachusetts. So right now, we're in year 3 of our 5-year program. So as it stands today, our bylaw is set to regulate or capture any land disturbances of 1 acre or more. And that's important to understand. It's not just any property that's 1 acre, it's a disturbance of 1 acre. So you could have a 1 acre property, someone could disturb 30,000 square feet, making completely impervious, and they're not required to come into or apply for a stormwater permit through the engineering division. And they may not even trigger a site plan review or a conservation filing. And we want to promote beneficial recharge within our own aquifer, both the Ipswich, our own aquifer in the North Coastal Basin, and then the Ipswich aquifer as well. In the bylaws, we have minimum control measures that we are required to meet. One is public education and outreach, public participation. We have illicit discharge detection and elimination bylaw that's already in place. That's required for us to make sure that we don't have illicit sewer connection to our stormwater system. Management of construction site runoff, management of post-construction site runoff with new developments and redevelopments, and then also for ourselves and in our own public works, good housekeeping for our municipal operations. And some of the highlights that we made changes into, what you've seen in Appendix B was one to the introduction. We basically just made that purpose to align directly with the MS4 permit that we have currently, and any subsequent changes that it may make. We added in a few definitions that were missing from the original 2011 amendment that was approved, bylaw that was approved. We changed the scope and applicability section, so now you have different permit thresholds that you may hit. Similar to what conservation has, if the amendment is voted favorably at town meeting, we'll have a major and a minor permit for stormwater. And then section 7, 8, 10, 11, and 12, subsequent after that, just administration, permit procedures, enforcement, fees and penalties were changed to reflect the new permit process. And then we added in emergency suspension of municipal storm drain access in case we need to do that. And then notification of spills and contaminants within our MS4 system area. So go right to the biggest change. The scope of applicability is the difference between a major stormwater permit and a minor stormwater permit. The previous bylaw didn't have any permits required for any connection to our existing infrastructure. Anybody could tie into our storm drain, stormwater system without requiring to get a permit through the Department of Public Works. So this brings it pretty much in line with what we do for our water and sewer. Required, anybody who wants to make a connection to our water system, our sewer system, they're required to have a water and sewer permit. We want to do the same for our stormwater. This will also include any alteration, disturbance, or development within the new overlay districts that were zoned in the Maple Street and High Street corridor area and Maple Street in downtown Danvers. To capture those areas because they're not specifically parcels that may have 1 acre, but they're going to be rezoned to be more impervious with the mixed use that they're allowed to have. We kept in the disturbance of 1 acre of land to capture what we've already been capturing as far as permits. And then all definitive subdivision approvals will still be required to have a major stormwater permit. The minor stormwater management permit, as we've had it developed in the new bylaw amendment, is any alteration, disturbance, development, or redevelopment project. Anything between any disturbance less than 1 acre but greater than 20,000 square feet. Any project requiring a special permit. Any residential with 3 or more units, condos. Any house on a new vacant lot. Replace an existing dwelling in kind, or reconstruction that is 50% more of a building footprint. We're also including any commercial properties, any areas within a flood zone, and specifically any areas with a higher potential pollutant loads as described in Massachusetts Standard for Stormwater Management Policy. And then lastly, just to circle back on the enforcement for the permits, we initially just had one flat $300 fine for any infractions for people who had a permit. We've changed that to now the majors has a first offense of $300, second offense of $300, subsequent, and then third offense $300 as well. Anything else to that is a continuous $300. The minor stormwater permit, first offense is a warning, second goes to $100, third offense is $200, and the fourth and subsequent offenses are $300. Maxed out just like the major stormwater permit. So I will take any questions that you guys, committee may have in regards to the appendix changes.
Thank you. Why don't we begin with Mike Daly?
Do these permits, to get approval on these, normally go through both the planning board when they're doing the site plan review and the Conservation Commission?
Can you say the question one more time?
In order to get a permit to do a lot of this work that you're talking about, does the developer have to go through the planning board for a site plan review? Because they talk about stormwater runoff too.
No,
and
this is
the Conservation Commission as well?
Some projects and developments can bypass the site plan and conservation process. This stormwater permit would capture some of those projects. So that developer may not have to go in front of the site plan approval process if he's potentially building let's say a 10,000 square foot house. It may not trigger site plan per se. You'll have a building permit, but then if you wanted to connect his house roof leaders to the stormwater system, or you wanted to disturb something that's 20,000 square feet, it would capture in a minor permit and be able to review that to make sure he's not doing anything detrimental to his abutters as far as stormwater runoff on his property.
Okay, so it wouldn't be all cases that have to go through this. The chemical, what if there's a chemical spill or something? That doesn't, what does that come under?
That's at the very end. That's a notification of spills. Section 12.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally Calhoun?
Thank you. I was concerned as I was trying to absorb this, that there were references to the Stormwater Authority. And as I dug further and was cross-referencing, I see that the DPW is the Stormwater Authority here. So we're not setting up a separate board or entity to handle this stormwater regulation or permitting process, are we?
No, we're just amending the current bylaw as it is, so we're not changing any of the designees of who the authority is for the stormwater in the town.
But that was one of my biggest questions, was kind of how is this going to operate? But it's pretty much operating in the same way it is now, just with...
We're just aligning ourselves with our federal permit to operate our stormwater system.
Thank you.
Ted?
I don't have any questions.
Mike?
So how many additional, I guess my concern with this, quite frankly, is the idea of quote-unquote catching projects that don't fall under site plan or special permits. How many of those do you think we have during the course of a year in which there's a development, say an A&R, that develops it as a single-family house on the A&R, which at this point right now I don't believe would require stormwater management, but would require it under this bylaw?
Yeah, it had to be more than 20,000 square feet of disturbance or a commercial property.
Well,
or a condo.
Yeah, but B shows it as any approval not required. I guess it's hard to, because the and is taken out of that. I guess lots that meet, so B is subservient to A on 2, section 4, paragraph 2, sections A and B. Section 4, paragraph 2, subsection. So I'm looking at the scope and applicability, and I'm looking at the bylaw is minor stormwater management permit shall be required. And we've got A, which shows that 20,000 square foot, and then we go to B, which is an approval not required. I'm sort of reading it as that is subservient, somehow B is subservient to A, so not all approval not requireds are, would necessitate a stormwater management.
Correct, yeah.
As long as it doesn't meet the criteria of.
Above.
Above, okay.
A simple, I apologize, like a simple lot line, we had one a couple weeks ago where 3 property owners are butting each other, just
Oh, yeah.
redrew their parcel line.
Yeah.
We wouldn't anticipate, there was no actual land disturbance.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't.
Trigger a
fall under-
stormwater.
It wouldn't trigger a stormwater permit, even a minor one, because there was no soil disturbance, it was just lot line.
So let's take a more traditional A and R in which if somebody's got a 45,000 square foot piece of property in Residence 2 and they divide it into two lots under the A and R, so each lot is 22,500 square feet.
Very unlikely, again, the combined soil disturbance activity associated with the redevelopment of those 2 lots would have to be in excess of 20,000 square feet.
So but it wouldn't be per lot, it's not 20,000 square feet in the entire
I think
development?
that's because the federal permit looks at development activity, so you can't
They
say,
just
well, I'm
building.
making 10 lots and each lot is
Yeah.
a little thing. They're making us look at the entire development footprint, so we needed a mechanism. And again, ideally, to your original point, very, very few. I mean, I can't think of one off the top of my head that would have met that trigger.
Would have required.
But again, to make sure that we're in line with the NIPD's permit or the MS4 permit, we felt that that was a situation where if somebody were threading the needle, we'd have to be able to capture it.
And most of those A&R plans too, I would have to say it'd be a very small percentage that A&R plan wouldn't go through land use and planning first before I would even see it as well, so.
Depends on how it.
I mean,
plays
they're
out.
required to file an application with the planning department prior to even coming and filling out a stormwater permit. And then that would trigger review through all the divisions as well.
I mean, I'm guessing that from the engineering standpoint, the vast majority of the work that you do in regards to stormwater is on definitive subdivisions and commercial development that requires a special permit.
And I'm starting to see a lot of residential, in the 4 years that I've been here, I'm starting to see a lot of residential uptick in development. And then obviously with the rezoning as well, we could see a potential change in the whole landscape of the downtown, which we need to be able to account for.
In any development, regardless of the size that occurs within the new zones that we've created, would be caught by this.
Correct.
So.
But as it stands right now, you could do a development and we wouldn't have to review any of the stormwater unless.
And you're getting reviewed anyway. I mean, Stephen King's office is reviewing the development. I'll just make, some site on High Street tries to redevelop. They're going to be reviewed by the town engineering division anyway. The point here was, again, to kind of align things so that there's not a slightly different standard for this one than that one. Because ultimately, under the NIPD's permit or the MS4 permit that we have from the EPA and the state, we're held ultimately as a community to ensure that there's no degradation to the resources adjacent to these areas.
Sure.
So it's again, it's easier to capture it at the front end and build it in when the development's going in than it will be to monitor that little outlet, brooklet, and realize that somehow there's sediment getting into that, into that resource. So,
And I think the big thing we're kind of talking about right now is during construction or pre-construction. We're not really relating the fact that post-construction, what's going to happen after the project is done. How are we going to make sure that that owner of that facility is making sure that they're fulfilling their long-term maintenance plan for their area, and that permit will require that of that developer or that new owner.
I can tell you that what my concern, which is something that I had to deal with at one point, was we had represented somebody who had a 2-family who was able to convert it to a 3-family with virtually no exterior changes. I mean, the changes that were on the exterior level were to deal with access and egress. But that kicked in stormwater management in regards to, because it was considered now a commercial property because it's 3 units. I think when we talked about changing the zoning downtown, that was one of the things that we were looking for, was to try to encourage people to do that. This is not, if that's the case, this is the case, and it's under this, that this is not going to encourage people to make that change, because the stormwater management, as you know, requires, we talked about before in the last one, that we don't want to bring engineers and those type of people into those situations if we're not going to have a dramatic change. And again, my concern would be that we don't have a dramatic change in terms of the actual placement of water, but yet we still have to have somebody come in and certify that there has been no change in water, despite the fact that all we're adding is exterior walkways or entryways or that type of stuff.
And again, if you're creating more impervious area, then you are creating a change to the property.
Well, I'm not talking about relatively minor impervious area, in terms of the addition of a exterior deck to be able to get up into it. So, I appreciate what we're trying to do with this. This is a good segue into one of the things that I think we need to be starting to look at, and that is that as we develop these changes, and I've had this discussion with Aaron, I think before, I think we need to begin to develop a peer review type of a scenario with this. Town meeting member Duggan sort of referred to this in one of the other ones. It's about the worst case scenario, in which what we do is we bring in a team of engineers, volunteer engineers and land use attorneys, and we basically say to them, take a look at what we're proposing. Let's have you tell us what you think you can do and what you can't do with this. And we get at least some real world experience before we put some of these changes into effect. Because unfortunately, as we know, far too often we make these changes, and then all of a sudden there's something that we didn't anticipate in regards to it. And I think that the peer review is a mechanism. I appreciate the work that's done, and I'm going to vote in favor of it. But this is something that I'm going to start to harp on. I think as we go forward, that type of review of any changes we make to our bylaws needs to be looked at.
I think that's a great point, because I also want to kind of reiterate that when we start talking about the actual stormwater regulations, that's where we really want to get the involvement of the community and do a public hearing and kind of lay out, all right, this is our minor permit, this is what's changed, this is what we're like to propose. Let's have a couple developers and engineers in the room and say, well, I can't do that if you do this, kind of just work together and have like a smart growth type conversation.
Yeah, we've always had a very antagonistic view towards development within the community, and I think that that's resulted sometimes in us having an us versus them attitude when we produce zoning changes and changes to the bylaw, and that's actually worked to our detriment in regards to having those be effective. We all, anyone who's been here in town, you guys probably don't remember it, but the tower on 114 is the perfect example of why we have that problem. I think that we're heading in a new direction with some of the stuff that I've seen, and I'd hope that we'd be able to bring in that sort of that collaborative peer review to be able to look at those things.
Yep.
So, thanks, David.
Thank you. Paul?
Well, I think Mike brought up a lot of good points, my concern was just not a concern, but it looks to me like maybe because of the new zoning down in High and Maple Street area and the potential for development, it looks to me like we're trying to head off a problem before we get into a problem. And I guess I'm not familiar. Once you develop everything, what you're really trying to do is figure out where the water is going to go before you have a disaster. Is that correct? Or is that an oversimplification?
No, that's correct. How are you gonna, if you're going to change or expand your footprint, your impervious footprint,
right.
Where are you going to do with that water? Are you going to try to recharge it? Are you going to connect to the existing stormwater system? Are you going to try and keep it as it is, an overland flow to your neighbor? And those are things we want to try and catch in this process. That obviously we want to promote recharge. We want to make sure stormwater is clean before it goes into our stormwater system. Right. This is some of the issues that we want to catch off before we get to a bigger problem.
On a lot of the redevelopment that we see, you know, again, I'll pick on Mr. Contos' site that we've talked, I'll pick on like the McDonald's site. I mean, those are developed so long ago that they don't have any stormwater
Right.
controls associated with them. And again, that gets back to, we're gonna review them now under site plan review authority. And Steve would probably apply many of these standards to that plan set anyway. All we're trying to do here is make it clear that what are the standards for you when you come forward, and we're tying those back to an obligation that we have to the federal government under the MS4 permit. And again, trying to capture where we can make those improvements as those properties redevelop. As we said, you can just shed water right now. A lot of those sites are just shedding it, and we're trying to make
Capture
sure
it,
we're capturing
infiltrate.
it. Yeah.
Do we have any recourse for existing properties that are just shedding water, or are they just, sort of grandfathered in and we have to put up with it?
If it's creating a detrimental effect to your neighbor, you can't do, I think our building code says you can't do that.
Can't, okay.
You can't shoot your stormwater at your neighbor.
Can't be a nuisance.
But those are really tough situations to navigate as we, you know, in
Right.
neighborhoods when you hear about these sorts of things.
Right, well, you know, I can remember the great flood in Houston, what, 3, 4, 5 years ago? If you remember that. And it seemed like what they did was they paved over everything. You know, strip malls, parking lots, everything. It's a lowland area, Houston, Texas, but that flood was ridiculous because they had no place to put the water. None whatsoever. Have we ever had any problems like that in the Danvers Square area? I remember we had a problem years ago down at the bottom of Summer Street. I don't know if Steve was here at the time, but.
Well, that was part of the Mother's Day storm, that flooded.
Were you here then?
I was not here, but I have pictures.
Right, but that's been resolved. But I think what we're trying to do is resolve issues before they come back and kick us, I guess.
And if I could jump in for a second, and I can only speak to this from 30,000 feet because I don't understand the details to the extent that Mike and Steve and others do, but Sally alluded earlier to the Stormwater Authority, and I want to use an example from this year's budget process. You know, the strengthening of this bylaw is intended to catch the problems before they become problems. From the development perspective, they sometimes like not being caught on the way in, but Mr. King's responsibility is to make sure that the system works the way that it's designed. As it stands, and so the example, we had one of the requests in the capital budget that didn't even see the light of day this year was close to $1 million project to correct a stormwater fallout problem that had essentially threatened somebody's property, and we're going to have to address in the next couple of years through the budget process. As it stands today, there's no funding mechanism for our stormwater improvements. Those are carried on the water and sewer rates. We all know that because of the permit that we have and our sale declines in the last couple of years because of the restrictions that are on our permit. Our revenues are declining in water sewer. We also have a 100-year-old system, so our sales are declining, which starves our revenue. The system's getting older and more expensive to maintain, and when you have to layer in all of the stormwater improvements that have to be made, it becomes almost, it exacerbates to the problem to the point of breaking. So updating and strengthening the stormwater bylaw is a critical step, but to the point Sally raised earlier, longer term, we have to talk about how we fund our stormwater improvements, because unlike water and sewer, where the gallons you use translate into your bill, some of the properties in town that are the worst offenders in terms of exacerbating our stormwater system's problems don't have to help pay to mitigate the solutions to those problems. So this is an issue that we'll be talking about moving forward, but the step today is to get the bylaw consistent with the permits that are out there at the state and federal level and make sure that we're applying appropriate review to the projects that have the potential to impact the stormwater system that we have in town.
Correct.
All set?
Yes, I'm all set.
Thank you. Sally Kearns.
Good, thank you. Listening, there's a lot to learn about this.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
You have no questions? No. Okay. Any citizens' comments? What's the will of the board?
Move to accept.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Article 5, Mass DOT request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Henry, I'll let Mr. Henry start, and then we may, so this is a request that came from the DOT, and I believe we have a representative from the DOT here tonight, so I don't
Oh,
want to.
great. I wasn't sure if you were going to be able to make it.
With the mask on, we're all, yeah, we're all
Thanks for letting me
strangers.
go last.
So Aaron, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, at a high level, this is an owner's petition, and the warrant booklet has, it's a pretty straightforward request. This parcel is presently part of the right-of-way for Route 1 through a process I'm sure the gentleman will explain. They've identified this as potential surplus property and would ask that the town rezone the parcel highway corridor zone. I did get a question today through Steve Bartha's office regarding what is highway corridor zone. It is a large, it's 1 acre minimum parcel zoning district. This site I think is 1.8, roughly 1.8 acres. It's contemplated that you'd see large retail, larger office. Home Depot on Route 1 is probably a really good example of what highway corridor zone wants to see. There are several other, like the Fridays, or the hardcover, that area, that's kind of, again, consistent with the type of development that you might expect to get out of a bylaw change like this. I don't think the state can speak to what they're going to get because they have to go through a public procurement process to dispose of the property, but that's what the zoning would be authorizing. We didn't dive into it in a great deal at the staff level. Looking at the map, as you can see, the town went through a long process several decades ago where it created the highway corridor zone and for land uses like this. And while we hope to at some point revisit highway corridor and what's allowed and maybe look at whether or not that's still properly calibrated for our needs, we understand why the current owner would pick highway corridor, and we don't object to that on its face.
Thank you. Did you want to address, you've been waiting patiently for a couple of hours, if you have anything you'd like to add? If you could just go to the microphone that he's about to clean.
Yep.
Just make sure you identify yourself, please.
Definitely. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you. My name is Tom Cox. I work for a company called Greystone. We provide real estate services to MBTA MassDOT with regard to disposition, sale, et cetera, et cetera. So other than what Aaron presented with regard to the change, et cetera, I'm happy to answer any questions about the procurement process, et cetera. One quick comment, MassDOT doesn't have any preferred use of the property other than to include it within the adjacent zoning district and allow for its open public procurement process from there, which somebody would have to comply with the local zoning, et cetera. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions to the extent that anybody has them.
Thank you. Sally Kearns?
Thank you. Yes.
Did you turn your mic back on?
Hi, I have a couple of questions. Thanks. So you're not with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Correct. No, we're a consultant with the Commonwealth.
Okay. And so how did this parcel come to be in the mix for surplusing, if that's the right verb?
Yep, definitely. So MassDOT Office of Real Estate is obligated, lack of a better description, to look at its property to create non-fair revenue or non-fee revenue to support the overall mission of transportation. So they look at all of their properties to see whether or not something is feasible. This was identified both internally and it has had past inquiries over the last couple of years from interested developer or purchaser types. They went through an entire process where it was deemed surplus by the various MassDOT operating departments.
And so do you happen to know, this is kind of a stretch, so if you don't know, I understand, but was this taken by eminent domain in the 1975 highway construction? Do you know?
What I know is that it was acquired in two separate acquisitions, one in 1921 and 1949.
Interesting. So for me, I have so many questions about this. I live in this area. I drive by this parcel of land, hundreds of times a week. And I often feel, so I'm glad you're not from the Commonwealth, because I often feel that the state treats my town almost like an afterthought with transportation issues, if you will. And so in that particular stretch, for example, there's no pedestrian access on both sides of Armory Road. There's better perimeter, better access if you're walking to cross the street to get to the edge of this parcel that you're referring to. But there's no crosswalk. The Armory is ho-hum. The curbing is eh. And to my way of thinking, this presents an opportunity for us as a town to say, oh, let's have a conversation. Let's have a discussion, Mass DOT, about that parcel and maybe some other issues of interest to the town in the realm of transportation. That's sort of the bigger picture. The more narrow parochial interest, in my view, is, well, okay, to what end? A huge big box retail across from the hotel, like facing Route 1. Is that the plan? So I have a lot of unanswered questions. I would really like to see us put the brakes on this, at least for a bit, and revisit, maybe have that conversation with Mass DOT about its plans and its thoughts about, apparently there's been discussion internally. Is that right?
Internally at MassDOT, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think it would be great for the town to have a chance to be part of that conversation.
So, as I said before, I work for MassDOT. I've worked with them as well as MBTA on multiple dispositions, and if the request is to, prior to the release of an ITB, before it went out to public bid, to have a discussion about what types of conditions may be included within that process to perhaps achieve some of the things that you're suggesting. That's something that MassDOT is absolutely open to. They've done it in the past with other communities. They would definitely do it here with Danvers as well. So.
You mean where they have a conversation, or there's an attempt to kind of, and I don't know at what level that might be, whether it would be from our town manager or DPW, but I feel like there's a lack of interaction. And the state has a huge impact on that whole part of town, quite frankly, between the jail, the college, there's a DYS facility, there's Hogan, there's the Armory, there's a state police barracks, there's a registry of motor vehicles. It's all within a mile and a half. And it just would be great to have some, there's a town interest in this. It's not just state property. It affects our neighborhoods, and my neighborhood in particular, but it affects the whole town. So I think that would be great. And so maybe the best thing would be, I'm thinking, to have no action on this article now, so that we can make sure that happens.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Paul?
A couple of questions. Has the town had any conversations with the state prior to this warrant coming up? Have they approached us in any way?
About this particular
Yes,
parcel?
yeah, about changing the zone.
I don't believe so. No.
I understand they're asking for a zoning change, isn't that correct?
Yeah. We've had conversations about process and timing and when the meetings are, but
Okay.
I've not had a conversation, I think, along the lines of what Mr. Kearns was outlining.
So they're asking for a zoning change. Is that correct? What are they looking for? What specific type of zoning are they looking for?
Thank you. So, as I think it's Aaron, sorry, had noted, is the adjacent zoning district is called the Highway Commercial Zoning District.
I can't hear that.
I'm sorry, the adjacent zoning district is called the Highway
Highway Corridor Zone.
Highway Corridor Zone, correct.
Corridor.
It's a commercial district. If you look at the zoning map, this parcel of land as well as the highway layout is not included within the, any zoning districts. We're asking for this piece of land, which is a total of 1.8 acres, to be included within that adjacent commercial zoning district.
Commercial, not residential.
That is correct, sir.
Now, when you say commercial, how does that compare to the, I think I'm in the right part of town now, across the street where Swingaway is?
It's across from the old Watson house.
No, isn't it?
It's behind the, it's basically.
Where's the Swingaway housing
Swingaway's
complex?
on your left when you come on.
But it's
you
in
come
that
up
same
Gates.
general area, right?
Yeah, on the same side of Route 1.
And that would be.
A little bit south.
And that would be commercial.
Yes.
Because of the.
Mr. Chair, isn't it behind where that new breakfast place is that
Yes.
everyone loves?
Yeah.
No,
Well,
you're coming up Armory Road and you pass Center Street and pretend you were taking Dayton Street to get on Route 1 South.
Right.
You go under
Nice.
under Route 1 and it's right there on your.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly, okay, I've got the right spot. But that could also, when you talk about commercial, you're talking potential, what I would consider residential apartment complex.
It certainly would be possible.
Yes, okay, all right. Okay, that answers that question for me.
Wait, he wants to say something.
I'm sorry.
Most residential uses are not allowed in highway corridor.
Most.
I mean, there's some provisions for pre-existing non-conforming residential structures that may exist in highway corridor, but you cannot propose without zoning relief residential. So I say most because, again, you'd have to.
But it would certainly be possible, or if we had a 40B situation, much like Swingaway, you could see some kind of development like that.
We are above 10%, so 40B is not a concern of ours. Of course, you could engage in a 40B development through the friendly 40B process on any site. This one not excluded, but as by right or even by special permit, multifamily is not permitted in highway corridor.
Highway corridor, right? And how does Swingaway fall into the highway corridor?
I'm looking at my zoning.
It does,
map.
but that was a 40B, I think.
Right, I know, that was a
40B.
40B, so they got to override it because we were below 10% at the time.
Right. I'm tempted to feel like I want to press the brakes on this a little bit too. I'm not sure where this is going. I don't know, it's sort of, I would almost prefer to recommend no action also. We got a big, reasonable size of land, a piece of land, and I'm not sure the town is going to have much say or what. I mean, this is what I'm concerned about. We don't tend to do that. That's not correct. But we have to be very careful that we don't make a decision, then come back and look back at it 5 years from now and say, what in the devil were we thinking? Now, they own the land, right? I mean, it's not our land. I don't know what the value of the land is at this particular point, but they need the zoning change, I believe. Is that correct? So that's our decision. As a town, we have the right to put the brakes on and think it through and make sure that we're not making an immediate reaction or a quick reaction and come back and think later on, well, we weren't thinking everything through at this point. That's my concern. They may get it eventually and it may work out, but right now I'm a little hesitant. That's what I have to say about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Mike?
And I have to admit, I haven't been down there. I should have probably taken a ride down there, I guess. But was the merge lane taken out from Route 1? There used to be, I think, a merge lane that came off of Dayton Street there.
I think a couple of us can answer it, and the answer is yes, the merge lane has been removed from Dayton Street onto Route 1.
I'm not so sure about that.
No. I've used that occasionally. I think you have a little, Mr. Chairman, I think there is some room to slide out and then move into traffic.
But it's not striped right now.
They're still in the process of doing the construction on Route 1. They still haven't done their surface course yet. Once they do the surface course, they'll restripe the merge lanes back into the abutting streets, like Center Street,
Right.
Electronics Ave, the Maple Street corridor. All those merge lanes haven't been repainted yet because they're still on the intermediate course. So once they're finalized on the surface course, then they'll come back and do the final line striping.
It'll come back to a merge.
Right.
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
so it wasn't, they haven't taken a portion of the highway in order to be able to expand the size of this particular parcel?
No, I don't think
Okay.
so.
The, I want to be very careful how I word this. The state is a different owner than other owners that I would look at. I hold them to a different standard. And accordingly, because it's late, and frankly, I'm not going to probably convince people other ways, because I think decisions have probably been made on this. But I won't support this change right now. I'm going to leave it at that, so I don't go beyond it.
So, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for interrupting, and, as a consultant or as a proponent, the smartest thing you can do is read a room, and I think I'm reading the room right now. And this is a procedural question or suggestion, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, from the zoning side, to the extent that we go to town meeting and we get a negative vote, by way of example, that freezes out the ability to, I guess, consider the zoning article for a couple of years, what have you. I'm hearing maybe discomfort and desire to have a further discussion. So I think what I'm going to suggest is perhaps, if the article is referred back to the planning board for further consideration, and then perhaps we come forward after further discussions with the town at the spring town meeting. I hear you loud and clear from some of these issues, and happy to have the discussion about how we proceed with the process and other discussions that you raise, and et cetera, and just have a dialogue over the next couple of months versus find ourselves with a denial that may freeze us for a couple of years.
So if it's the will of our board, we could certainly recommend no action with the recommendation to town meeting that it be referred back to the planning board for further discussion. However, that would be the extent of the scope of what we could do in terms of the negative. We could certainly also pass it in the affirmative. So those are, it's either a vote of no action with a specific guidance or a passing in the affirmative.
Through you, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
and it's sort of a question to the town manager on that. I appreciate wise applicants who do read a room, and I would want to personally honor his request. It is different than the planning board, where we don't have the ability, but we're in a difficult position too, because normally what I would request is that we get an opinion from the town council as to what we can and can't do in regards to this. But we're not going to be at the town meeting before as a board.
Right.
And I don't have any desire to go to the town meeting as a board before. So in your opinion, Mr. Town Manager, through you, Mr. Chair, do you believe that we would have the authority to not vote no action, but to vote under the particular proposal that we have to refer this back to the planning board?
I'm going to have to call Mr. Henry into the discussion too. I think that a no would result in the outcome that the proponent is asking we avoid. I don't know that a no action vote would similarly trigger that. It may not.
Is a referral back to the board for more study, is that considered a negative vote by town meeting? That said, the caveat to the repetitive petition scenario that is prohibited under state law, the repetitive petition only exists if the planning board doesn't like part 2 or attempt number 2. So in theory, if we were to recommend no action, work with the applicant and, some sort of process is set up, And at the end of that process, the planning board says to town meeting and the Board of Selectmen, you know, we support this petition, then it is not a repetitive petition if they make that affirmative statement. So I think, again, I think to Mr. Lander's question, we certainly did that a lot in one of my prior stops, and it was not deemed a negative action to refer back, and oftentimes that made good proposals better and bad proposals good. So again, I don't think we should get too hung up on the legalities of it, but I'll defer to my boss on that. But I do think that that's a reasonable course of action.
Okay. I'd support that.
Could I chime in?
Sally, yeah.
I don't really understand the reluctance here, to tell you the truth, because right now, this piece of property is owned by the state, and it is currently part of the Route 1 right-of-way, which means that the town has no authority over it, no control over what can happen with it. As long as the state owns it, it's part of this right-of-way. So now the state, which owns it, is saying to us, hey guys, this piece of property is in the middle of one of your own zoning categories. Why don't you pull our property, the state property, into your own zoning section, your zoning bylaw, because we're thinking of selling it, and in our RFP, we're going to say whoever wants to buy it has to comply with the town's zoning bylaw. So we're actually preserving our, I shouldn't say our, but the town's ability to shape what happens there by agreeing to pull it into our zoning bylaw. Right now, it's not. So to me, we have a lot more control if we say, oh yeah, look at every other parcel around it is in the highway corridor district. I know I keep saying that wrong, but to me, it gives us, it's like it's a win to me to say, this is how we're gonna treat this in our zoning bylaw. And anybody that wants to come and look at this property is gonna need to come and talk with us about what the restrictions and requirements are for that zoning category. So to me, it's giving us the opportunity to shape it, and to not agree to it, to me, kind of takes some of that, it diminishes that power that we have.
I think I got skipped over here, and it's totally fine, I get it. We sort of went on a segue there, but, so, my first comment is, I live here, just like Sally, I drive by this parcel of land probably a minimum of 2 times a day when I'm in town, okay? We say that this is a highway corridor zone, like everything, like it's Peabody or Saugus, where everything is cement and asphalt, and big box retailers line both sides of the highway. That's not what this is. When you drive to Center Street, to Armory Road, on your left-hand side is Calitri's. It's presently for sale and unoccupied and not generating any revenue or jobs for Danvers. To the south of that is a commercial lot that's got probably 7 small businesses in it. Typically, at least one of the storefronts is vacant at any given time. There's been a fair amount of turnover in there, but hopefully those businesses are doing well. Those businesses face Route 1. The rear of those businesses face a big hill across Armory Road. On top of the big hill is a Best Western, 30 feet above eye level of a driver.
Yeah.
The Armory is down at the other end towards Center Street. Center Street, right? Okay. I counted 0 big box retailers in what I just described. To the right, I head towards Dayton Street. Immediately at the stop sign at Dayton Street, to the right is the parcel of the property you're talking about. It's completely wooded right now, okay? Immediately at that stop sign, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 residential residences. And I would like to know if somebody could refresh or educate me on the history of this highway corridor zone, and did these houses pre-exist the zoning? And did this zoning come about as a result of the 40B action that is now in Endicott Green?
Great question. Really good question. No one remembers.
I don't know the year highway corridor was created. The single-family homes at the end of Dayton are pre-existing non-conforming, meaning they were there first. Then the town went through a process that introduced the highway corridor zone. I don't know what year that occurred. I'm gonna say 70s, 80s vintage zoning action. The swing away was a 40B development that has a totally different backstory to how and why that happened and where it happened.
But I've seen a lot of the planning that comes before us, and rightfully so, has been a direct result and explained to us as a result of what happened with Swingaway. A lot of the zoning and our desire to stay ahead of the affordable housing thresholds and everything is a result of what happened on that parcel of land. That's the way I've understood it for several years that I've been on this committee.
Yeah, I mean, I would, Mr. Chair, I would probably say that's part of it. I wouldn't say it was the primary impetus down there. I would probably tell you that the primary impetus was farther down on 114 and the large property that's on commercial property on 114. Yep. That this was that the highway corridor zone which was probably a much more intricate and properly worked through zone. My recollection is, and I could be wrong with this, but my recollection is that the swing-away went in there regardless of the zone. So right. The highway corridor zone was not a response to swing-away. Swing-away simply went in despite the highway corridor zone because there was more value in it. Those houses, they're a much more interesting component to this. They were basically very early flips, if you want to think of it that way, and you know they're a vestige of a prior time down there that just hasn't left, and frankly, that the parcels are not capable of being able to be combined in a way effectively that would allow it to be developed. I think in concert with the new zoning that's there, and we do see that occasionally. I think where we have properties that are old residential properties that you would think would be more likely to go to the higher, better zoning use, but they just can't. So I mean, I think that's the sort of the history of it down there. I would say this, and I very much appreciate Sally's comments in regards to this, but it is true that we would have technically more control over this if we applied the zoning component to it, except for the fact that there's no indication that the state is going to do anything with this until it sells it. So, the state could conceivably do a lot of things there. The reality is that they're not interested in doing a lot of things there. They're interested in sort of talking to us and to develop, maybe give us a little bit more control on top of what we would have in regards to the zoning. It sounds like, and they would be cooperative to work with us to that extent, and I think that would be a worthwhile avenue to take in regards to this. I think in a normal, that's why I said the state is a different actor. It's a different type of an owner. If this was a private owner, and that private owner, of course, they wouldn't have no zoning applied to them. But if we had a private owner that had no real zoning restrictions, perhaps they were in the old residential zoning, and they were going to develop it as a commercial, whatever. Then in that situation, I think it would be different. But with it being the state, I just think that there is a value in, as Paul said, putting the brakes on this for a short period of time and taking a much stronger look and work with the state to be able to have our representatives in the town work with the state to make sure that this is the best possible outcome for both sides.
And if I could, thank you, I agree. And I don't think that we give up anything by putting the brakes on this. If the zoning is in fact there to give us some kind of advantage or protection, well, then that will reveal itself in our discussions. But it's kind of a false choice to say, well, gee, we should do this now, because we lose nothing, I think, by slowing this down and saying, and no knock on poor guy comes to, hey, go up to Danvers to that FinCom thing. You won't be in it. You'll be in and out of there in 20 minutes. Well, sorry, but I do think it behooves us to
Can I
slow
make
down.
2 more quick points?
Go ahead.
The first thing is, traffic-wise, I think there's 67 bedrooms in Endicott Green. All those people have to egress onto Dayton Street there to get into town. So, and then there's probably, I don't know, probably 50 single-family homes that have been built on Dayton Street in the last 20 years. And I don't think there's been a single upgrade to the roads. I think they're probably narrower than the state recommends at several turns. There's no sidewalks.
No sidewalks.
On either side.
Like, the idea that now we're gonna further encourage any kind of additional traffic or high-density development on Dayton Street, considering the lack of upgrades on that street relative to the development there in the last 20 years, is laughable. And in my mind, once we zone this property, we lose our control. Then we have to argue why it's not suitable and why if something can go in Lot C, can't go here. Right now, nothing can go there. I'm pretty comfortable with that until I see what the plan is. It's like, honestly, frankly, the way it sailed through the zoning commission meeting, I'm even more comfortable with that. Like, I don't think that we've done this neighborhood a service with our zoning strategy for the last 25 years. And it's time for that to stop. I'll stop talking.
Thank you. Sally, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No.
No.
Thank you, though.
Mike Daly.
Oh, thank you.
Saving the best for last.
Probably not.
Probably not.
There's no reason why possibility exists in the future that the state could sell that land to a developer, right?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. I'm mysteriously suspicious that something could happen up there that would be detrimental to the neighborhood. And as we speak tonight, there are 2 developers attending a ZBA meeting trying to put altogether about 340 condos or apartments on Endicott Street, which is going to cause complete gridlock if it ever goes through, including a 5-story high building where the old Denny's restaurant was. We already got burned, according to my old friend, former planning board member and a selectman, by the towers at Ferncroft. So I think it would be having a negative impact, and I go along with Mr. Blake saying that there's no reason why we can't just vote no action on this and just let it go for the time being the way it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Oh, Charlie was going to say one too.
Charlie Linscomb, Precinct 8. I just want to reiterate whatever Sally was saying. Put a brakes on this one. It's just too much going on down there. We do have the Center Street and Dayton Street that abut this property. If you've ever come down Center Street any time of the day, the traffic in there is ridiculous. You can sit there for 10, 15 minutes sometimes. So especially when some of the bigger workplaces are getting out. So please just put a hold on this and put it back for restudy for the spring town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Anything else? Paul?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
Move no action on Article 5.
Second.
Any discussion?
I have a question. Were we going to vote no action and refer back to the planning?
Could we do that?
Is that what we're
We
doing?
can certainly do that, sure.
Yes, and refer back to the planning board.
Second.
That's a friendly amendment?
Yes, it is.
Wait a minute.
Sally, do you have a
Well, yeah, the whole point, I think, is to have some
discussion?
So let's not just kick it to the planning board, because then it's a different kind of animal, is it not? I mean,
I don't think so,
I'm
because I
looking
think
for dialogue with the state.
I think Aaron's department, who acts as support staff to the planning board, would be the person, the appropriate person to have those discussions on behalf of the town.
would be the dialogue with the state.
With the state, exactly.
I would also want to clarify, I think we have to be careful that we're not linking the rezoning of a specific parcel to issues we may have more broadly with the DOT, in
No,
this
not in the
corridor, or
least.
sidewalks or
No.
anything like that.
That's
So
why I said nothing.
I think that the planning board is the appropriate place to take a look at this, and that may be a parallel discussion, in addition to wanting input with what may eventually happen on this parcel. There might be a recommendation that the Board of Selectmen engage with the DOT through management to discuss some of these other issues that are broader than just this parcel. I think we don't want to link those issues with the ultimate disposition of a single parcel of property.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. With no action, with a referral to the planning board.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All opposed? Thank you, everyone.